Hey everyone. Tonight we're going to a place where the sea and sky melt into a single churning shade of gunmetal gray. Imagine you're standing on the deck of a fishing trawler, the wind so sharp it feels like it's slicing through your clothes, each gust carrying the raw, salty smell of the deep ocean. The boat lurches, a constant, sickening rhythm, and a freezing spray hits your face that feels less like water and more like a handful of icy needles. Honestly, with the constant damp, the bone-deep cold, and the risk of a rogue wave washing you overboard into water that would kill you in minutes, you probably wouldn't survive this for more than a day. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you are re-listening from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see where these stories land. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The floor beneath your feet isn't solid. It's a vibrating steel plate slick with fish scales and seawater, humming with the deep thrum of a diesel engine that never, ever stops. You are in the North Atlantic, somewhere in the vast, unforgiving expanse between Iceland and the British Isles. This is the stage for our story, but it's a stage without curtains or comfortable seating. It's a place of profound, beautiful, and terrifying emptiness. Out here, land is a rumor, and the only certainty is the horizon, a perpetually shifting line that promises nothing but more water. Your world has shrunk to the length of this vessel, a tiny metal shell tossed about by forces you can't comprehend, let alone control. And you are here for one reason. You are here for the king. Not a human king, of course, they have little power here. The true monarch of this realm is a fish, Gadus morhua, the Atlantic cod. It doesn't look like much, really. It has a mottled greenish-brown skin, a pale lateral line running down its side, and a chin that sports a single rather unimpressive barbel, like a perpetually disappointed old man. But you must not judge this king by its appearance. For 1,000 years, this fish has been more valuable than some precious metals. It built nations, funded empires, and fed continents. Its flesh is mild and flaky, but more importantly, it's low in oil. This means that when salted and dried, it can be preserved for years, becoming a durable, protein-packed currency known as stockfish. This was the fuel of the Viking voyages, the rations for medieval armies, the cargo that built the fortunes of the Hanseatic League. Long before you could pop a frozen fish stick in the microwave, this creature was a cornerstone of Western civilization. This specific patch of water you're churning through is special. It's called the Iceland Basin, a sort of undersea cradle where the warm currents of the Gulf Stream meet the icy, nutrient-rich waters flowing down from the Arctic. The result is an explosion of plankton, a buffet that draws in smaller fish, which in turn draw in the cod, billions of them. For centuries, this has been one of the most productive fishing grounds on planet Earth, a biological treasure chest, just sitting here in the middle of the ocean. And for just as long, men have come here to empty it. You look over the side of the trawler, down into the opaque gray water. The old sailors, the ones who worked these seas a century before you, they told stories. They spoke of monster cod, fish the size of a man, creatures of the deep that could supposedly swallow a seabird whole. It sounds like a fisherman's tall tale, the kind of thing you'd tell a lad on his first voyage just to see the whites of his eyes. But there's a kernel of truth to it. Before the age of industrial fishing, the cod here grew to incredible sizes, living for decades in the crushing pressure and cold. What you're fishing for now are their descendants, smaller and less numerous with every passing year. The treasure chest is still rich, but many are noticing the bottom is becoming visible. Historians still argue whether the simmering tensions of the early 20th century were born from simple greed, a fight over a finite resource, or if the fish were merely a symbol for a deeper clash of identities. On one side, you have the British. Their fishing fleets are vast, coming from towns like Grimsby and Hull, places where the salt is in the air and in the blood. For them, the sea is a right. Freedom of the seas isn't just a legal concept. It's an article of faith backed by the largest navy the world has ever known. They see these waters as an open commons, theirs to fish as they have for generations. It's not arrogance, not exactly. It's just the way things are. Then you have the Icelanders, a tiny nation of fiercely independent people living on a volcanic rock at the edge of the world. They have no grand navy, no global empire. For them, the sea is not a commons. It is their farm, their larder, their entire economy. Everything, their past, their present, their future, is tied to the health of these cod stocks. When a British trawler drops its nets here, it isn't just taking fish. From the Icelandic perspective, it's taking the food from their children's mouths. It's a quiet, slow-motion home invasion. So here you are, on the deck of this boat, caught between these two worlds. The sea doesn't care about your nationality, your politics, or your economic theories. It offers up its bounty, and it is you, the human, who must decide how to share it. For now, there's an uneasy peace. The boats from different nations give each other a wide berth. A nod from one captain to another across 100 yards of swelling water is the extent of international diplomacy. But the engines are getting more powerful. The nets are getting bigger. The holds are filling faster. And down below, in the cold, silent dark, the king's realm is shrinking. You pull your collar tighter against the wind, a wind that feels like it's whispering of a coming storm, one that has nothing to do with the weather. That wind you feel, the one that seems to carry the ghosts of 1,000 drowned sailors, is the same wind that powered the first forays into these hostile waters. To understand the fight that's brewing, you have to understand the tools. You have to rewind time, peeling back the layers of technology until your throbbing diesel engine sputters and fades, replaced by the creak of timber and the snap of a woolen sail. Picture yourself 1,000 years earlier. You are in a Viking longship, or more likely, a smaller, sturdier vessel called a nar. The boat is open to the elements, a carved wooden shell sitting low in the water. There is no warmth, no shelter, just your fellow sailors, a pile of wet ropes, and the endless, heaving sea. Your method for catching the king is brutally simple. You have a line spun from hemp or animal sinew, and a hook carved from bone or forged from iron. You bait it with a piece of herring, lower it into the deep, and you wait. The cold seeps into you through the soles of your leather boots, through your damp woolens. When you feel the tug, you haul, hand over freezing hand, pulling a thrashing silver-green body from the depths. You kill it, gut it, and toss it onto a pile with the others. This is not a job. It is a battle for survival. You are not harvesting a resource. You are wresting your next meal from a godlike sea that might just decide to swallow you whole for your impertinence. The scale is human. The number of fish you can catch is limited by the strength in your arms and the number of hours you can endure the exposure before your hands become useless claws. The cod stocks, vast and seemingly infinite, barely notice your efforts. For centuries, this is the rhythm of the North Atlantic fishermen. But then, something changes on land that will forever alter the sea. Far to the south, in warm, sunny Rome, men in elaborate robes make a decision. The medieval Catholic Church enacts its Lenten edicts, forbidding the consumption of meat on Fridays and for the 40 days of Lent. Suddenly, a continent of the faithful needs a new source of protein. And there, waiting in the cold northern waters, is the cod. This religious decree creates the first truly massive international market for fish. It becomes a vital commodity, and the demand drives innovation. You can't feed all of Christendom with a hook and line from an open boat. You need to get serious. The first big step is the boat itself. The open coffin ships of the Middle Ages are slowly replaced by larger decked vessels. You are now on a sailing smack from the 18th century. Having a deck beneath your feet is a revolution. It means you are less likely to be washed overboard by a freak wave. It means you have a small, cramped space below to escape the worst of the weather. It means you can carry more provisions, stay at sea for longer, and venture further from the coast. But you are still limited by the wind. A dead calm leaves you stranded, and a gale can still rip your mast to shreds and send you to the bottom. With a bigger boat, you need a better way to fish. The hook and line feels inefficient, too much work for too little reward. So, you develop the beam trawl. Imagine a heavy wooden beam, maybe 30 feet long, with a large cone-shaped net attached to it. You lower this contraption to the seabed and drag it behind your sailing vessel. It's clumsy, heavy, and brutally effective. Instead of selectively pulling one fish at a time, you are now scraping the ocean floor, scooping up everything in your path. Cod, yes, but also plaice, halibut, crabs, starfish, and rocks. It's the first real step towards industrial-scale fishing. Scholars still debate the exact moment when this relationship with the sea turned predatory, but many point to the first time a beam trawl was dragged across a pristine spawning ground. Even this has its limits. Dragging that heavy beam requires a strong, steady wind, something the Atlantic is not always willing to provide. The true revolution, the one that unleashes humanity's full extractive power upon the ocean, arrives with a hiss of steam and a cloud of black coal smoke. Now you're standing on the deck of a steam trawler. Late 19th century, the rhythmic chug-chug-chug of the engine is the sound of mankind breaking its final leash to the wind. You can go where you want, when you want, in almost any weather. A trip that took a sailing smack weeks can now be done in days. And with the brute force of a steam winch, your nets can be bigger and heavier than ever before. It's like going from a horse-drawn plow to a diesel tractor in a single generation. And the nets themselves evolve. The cumbersome beam trawl is replaced by a stroke of evil genius, the otter trawl. Instead of a rigid beam, the mouth of the net is held open by two large weighted panels called otter boards, or doors. As they are pulled through the water, they act like wings, pushing outwards and forcing the mouth of the net to open wide, far wider than any wooden beam could manage. The modern trawl net is born. It is an efficient, indiscriminate engine of extraction. For the fish below, it must be terrifying. A rumbling sound in the distance, growing louder, and then two great clouds of silt kicked up by the doors, funneling every living thing into a vast, silent mouth of mesh from which there is no escape. This is why you are here, hundreds of miles from your home port in England. This incredible technology, the steam engine, the powerful winch, the otter trawl, has allowed you and your countrymen to fish your own coastal waters, like the massive Dogger Bank in the North Sea, to the point of exhaustion. The stories of monster cod are now just that, stories. So the fleets must push ever further, chasing the remaining shoals north and then west, into the cold, rich waters surrounding Iceland. The technology that made your industry a powerhouse is the same technology that is now driving you into your neighbor's backyard, creating a tension you can feel in the air, a tension as palpable as the cold. The groaning winch hauls the bulging net from the deep, and as it's hoisted over the deck, it looks like a giant silver teardrop, weeping the wealth of the ocean onto your filthy boots. The great net swings over the deck, and with a pull of a lever, the cod end opens. A silver avalanche of fish, thousands of them, thunders onto the deck, thrashing and gasping in the alien air. Your work has just begun. For the next several hours, you stand in a chaos of flapping tails and grasping gills, your hands moving with brutal automated efficiency. You gut, you clean, you sort, you pack. The fish are layered with ice in the vast refrigerated hold below deck, a frigid treasure chamber filling with the profits of your labor. You are the first link in a long chain, and that chain leads back home, to Britain. After days or weeks at sea, your trawler turns its bow towards port. You steam into a harbor like Hull or Grimsby, places that don't just host a fishing industry but are the fishing industry. The air itself smells of fish, diesel, and salt. Your catch is unloaded by teams of men called lumpers, who work with astonishing speed, hoisting crate after crate onto the bustling quayside auction. Here in a cavernous, echoing hall that feels more like a stock exchange than a fish market, your cod is sold to the highest bidder. But its journey is far from over. From the auction house, the fish is rushed to another modern marvel, the railway. Special express trains solely for fish wait at the docks. These are the arteries of the industry, pumping the fresh catch from the coast deep into the heart of the country. As the train rattles through the night, you can imagine it as a race against time, a race against decay, ensuring the bounty of the cold Atlantic reaches the plates of factory workers in Manchester and miners in Wales while it's still fresh. And it is there, in the smoggy, gaslit streets of industrial Britain, that you find the true engine of your entire enterprise. You're standing on a corner, the ever-present drizzle slicking the cobblestones. The air is thick with the smell of coal smoke, but mixed with it is something else, something irresistible. The aroma of hot oil, vinegar, and frying fish. This is the birthplace of the fish and chip shop. Born in the mid-19th century, this meal is a direct consequence of the technology you now wield at sea. The steam trawler provides the cheap, plentiful white fish, and the railways deliver it to the masses. For the working class of the Industrial Revolution, fish and chips is a miracle. It's hot, it's cheap, it's packed with protein, and you can eat it out of a newspaper wrapping on your way home from a grueling 12-hour shift. It becomes the fuel of the workforce, the comfort food of a nation, the unofficial national dish. The cod you pulled from the sea near Iceland has completed its journey. Sociologists and historians still debate whether the universal love for fish and chips was a spontaneous cultural phenomenon or a calculated outcome of industrial capitalism. Was it a genuine bottom-up comfort food that captured the soul of the working class? Or was it perhaps a convenient and highly efficient way to ensure the nation's industrial workforce was fed a protein-rich diet, keeping them strong enough to work the machines that powered an empire? The answer is likely a bit of both, but the result is the same. An entire nation becomes utterly dependent on and fiercely protective of a steady, affordable supply of cod. This national appetite fosters a powerful mindset. The freedom of the seas is no longer just a naval doctrine, it's a domestic necessity. The idea that anyone could interfere with the fleets that supply the nation's favorite meal is not just an economic threat, but a cultural insult. And Britain has the muscle to back up its feelings. You might assume the Royal Navy, the most powerful military force on the planet, concerns itself only with grand strategy and colonial conquest. But you'd be wrong. For centuries, it has maintained a little-known but very active branch, the Fishery Protection Squadron. Affectionately and somewhat comically known as the Cod Squad, its entire purpose is to patrol the fishing lanes, protect British vessels, and handle disputes. The very existence of this squadron tells you everything you need to know. A nation that dedicates a piece of its legendary navy to policing fish arguments is a nation that takes its fish very, very seriously. It's a clear signal that when it comes to cod, Britain is prepared to let diplomacy fail and have the gray-hulled ships take over. This all fits perfectly within the broader imperial consciousness. You, as a Briton of this era, live with the casual certainty of being at the center of the world. Your country administers a global empire, and the planet's resources are, by a sort of unspoken logic, yours to manage and profit from. The cod swimming in the North Atlantic are viewed no differently than the tea grown in Ceylon. They are a commodity, there for the taking by those with the will and the technology to do so. You're back on your trawler now, the hold is full, and you're heading home. The coastline of Iceland is a faint dark line on the horizon. It looks like the edge of the world, a place of sagas and volcanoes, but not a place of consequence. It seems utterly disconnected from your reality of steam, steel, and commerce. The thought that the people living on that desolate rock might soon lay claim to the very water beneath your keel, challenging the fleets of Great Britain and the Royal Navy itself, is simply unimaginable. It would be a joke told in a pub, a fantasy. For now, you are content. You are a provider for an empire, a hunter on a sea that has no fences, a sea that belongs, you believe, to everyone, but mostly to you. That distant dark line on the horizon, the one the British trawlerman dismisses as an unimportant rock, is your home. And from where you're standing, it is the center of the universe. You are now an Icelander. Forget the grimy, crowded streets of industrial Britain. Your world is one of staggering primal beauty and unforgiving harshness. It is a landscape forged in fire and ice. A place of active volcanoes, grinding glaciers and vast, moss-covered lava fields that look like the surface of another planet. The sky here is immense, a stage for the shimmering spectacle of the northern lights in winter and the unsettling glow of the midnight sun in summer. Life here has never been easy. It is a constant negotiation with a powerful and often violent natural world. Your history is not one of conquering others, but of surviving what your own land throws at you. For 1,000 years, your ancestors have endured volcanic eruptions that poisoned the sky and killed the livestock, freakishly cold winters that froze the harbors solid, and a profound, inescapable isolation. You are a nation perched on the edge of the inhabitable world, and this shared struggle has forged a character of quiet resilience, dark humor, and a fierce, almost stubborn independence of spirit. Your national literature isn't about empires and glorious battles. It's the sagas, epic tales of families, feuds, and survival against impossible odds. Complicating this struggle is the fact that for most of your history, you haven't even been your own master. Since the 13th century, you have been under the rule of foreign kings, first Norwegian, then Danish. You are, for all intents and purposes, a colony. Your laws were made in Copenhagen. Your trade was controlled by Danish monopolies, and your people were often treated as rustic, second-class subjects of a distant crown. This long period of subservience, which only truly ended when you became a fully independent republic in 1944, while Denmark was occupied by Germany, has left a deep psychological mark. It has instilled in you a burning, passionate desire for self-determination and a deep suspicion of larger nations telling you what to do. In this environment where the land gives so little, the volcanic soil is thin, the growing season brutally short, you have always looked to the sea. The sea is your one reliable provider. The cod is your salvation. It is not just a part of your economy, it is the entire foundation of it. It is the reason you can afford to import the things you cannot make or grow: the wood, the grain, the medicine. Without cod, modern Iceland simply ceases to exist. This reality is reflected in your diet. For centuries, your meals have been a monotonous cycle of what the island and the sea provide: smoked lamb, dairy products like the thick, sour yogurt called skyr, and fish. So much fish. Fresh fish, dried fish, salted fish, fermented fish. You learn to preserve every scrap of protein, leading to culinary creations like hakarl, shark meat buried to ferment and then hung to dry, possessing an ammonia-rich taste that outsiders find challenging. It's a joke to you now, but it was born from a deadly seriousness. You ate it because you had to. The national saying, "Thorskastridin," the Cod Wars, sounds almost comical, but the underlying truth, Fiskerin Bjargar, the fish saves us, is the bedrock of your society. So when you stand on a cliff in the Westfjords and look out at the ocean, you don't see an open commons, a free-for-all buffet as the British do. You see your fields, and you see them being plundered. The lights of the foreign trawlers, dozens and dozens of them from Britain and Germany, flicker on the horizon day and night. They are like a vast, mechanized herd of bison, grazing your pastures down to the nub, taking the one resource that allows your nation to survive, let alone prosper. Historians still debate to what extent Iceland's aggressive push to control its fisheries was a purely pragmatic economic strategy or a deeply symbolic act of post-colonial defiance. Was it simply a logical, calculated move to secure the nation's primary source of income? Or was it something deeper? Was it the ultimate expression of your new sovereignty? After centuries of being told what to do by Copenhagen, was drawing a line in the ocean and defending it your way of telling the whole world, especially the old European empires, that you were finally unequivocally the masters of your own fate? The truth, as you feel it in your bones, is that it was both. It was a fight for your wallet and a fight for your soul. The sheer imbalance of the potential conflict is almost absurd. Your entire nation consists of fewer people than live in a mid-sized British city like Coventry. You have no army, you have no navy. Your fleet is a handful of patrol vessels, mostly repurposed fishing boats, which you have dignified with the name Coast Guard. You are David, not just without a slingshot, but without even a decent rock to throw. And you are contemplating picking a fight with Goliath, a Goliath who still possesses one of the most powerful navies on Earth. But in the cafes and government offices of Reykjavik, a new confidence is taking hold. You are a new republic, a founding member of NATO, and you are tired of being pushed around. The fishermen, the true heroes of your culture, are demanding action. Protecting the young, vulnerable fish in the spawning grounds around the island is becoming a national crusade. It is a cause that unites every politician, every farmer, every shopkeeper. It is a matter of national survival, wrapped in the flag of national pride. You look out at those foreign lights again. They operate under international law, a law that says the sea is free. But that law was written by the big countries, for the big countries. and you decide, with a cold, clear certainty, that if the law is unjust, the law must be broken. The decision hardening in the Icelandic mind, that the law must be changed, runs headfirst into a wall of tradition, a legal concept as old and stubborn as the sea itself. To understand the looming confrontation, you have to step off the trawler and into the shoes of an international lawyer, probably one with a powdered wig and a very dry sense of humor. For centuries, the guiding principle of maritime law has been the cannon shot rule. It's a beautifully simple, if brutally pragmatic idea. A nation's territorial waters extend from its coastline as far as a cannonball can be fired. This was formalized to roughly 3 nautical miles. Beyond that, the sea was the mare liberum, the free sea, open to all. This wasn't some arbitrary rule. It was a worldview championed by the great maritime powers. Britain, with its globe-spanning navy and merchant fleet, was its most ferocious defender. At conferences like the one at The Hague in 1930, British diplomats argued forcefully that this narrow limit was essential for global trade and naval mobility. A 3-mile limit meant their ships, both military and commercial, could sail almost anywhere unimpeded. It also, quite conveniently, meant their fishing trawlers could access the rich coastal waters of nearly every nation on Earth. To them, this was the natural order of things, a system that promoted freedom and commerce. From your perch in Reykjavik, however, this rule seems less like a noble principle and more like a historical joke with a terrible punchline. You don't have a global navy. You aren't interested in naval mobility. You are interested in the survival of the cod spawning grounds 50 miles offshore. A 3-mile limit is utterly, tragically useless. It is like putting up a small "please keep off the grass" sign to protect a national park from a fleet of bulldozers. The law, as it stands, was written by the powerful to protect the powerful. The technology of fishing has galloped ahead, while the law remains stuck in the age of sail. And that technology is accelerating at a terrifying pace. The years after the Second World War unleash a wave of new innovations. You're on the bridge of a brand new trawler in the early 1950s. The old skills of the skipper, his instinct, his knowledge of tides, his closely guarded charts of seabed features, are still valued, but they are now supplemented by something that feels like magic. It's an echo sounder, a sonar device. A constant rhythmic ping emanates from the hull. On a screen, a ghostly green line traces the contours of the seabed, and more importantly, it shows you dense, blob-like shapes suspended in the water below. It's a shoal of cod. There is no more guesswork. The fish can no longer use the vastness and darkness of the deep to hide. You can now hunt them with scientific precision. Fishing has been transformed from a hunt into a targeted, military-style harvest. This new aggressive efficiency raises a chilling question. Marine biologists and historians still argue about when the point of no return was crossed for these once bountiful cod stocks. Was it this post-war technological leap that doomed them? Or had the damage been done decades earlier, the cumulative effect of a generation of relentless steam trawling, interrupted only by 2 world wars? Those wars, ironically, provided a brief sanctuary for the fish, as trawlers were converted into minesweepers and fishing intensity dropped. The fish populations actually began to recover, but this recovery only served to encourage an even more intense fishing frenzy once peace returned, wiping out the temporary gains. The apex of this technological arms race is a vessel that slides out of a British shipyard in 1954. It is called the Fair Tree, and it is the world's first purpose-built factory trawler. You step aboard, and you realize this is not just a bigger fishing boat, it is a paradigm shift. At the stern, a huge ramp slopes down into the water, allowing the entire, massive net, bulging with up to 60 tons of fish, to be winched directly up onto the main deck. From there, the catch is dropped into a vast processing floor below. Here, under fluorescent lights, hundreds of workers and a dazzling array of machinery work around the clock. The fish are gutted, headed, filleted, skinned, and then flash frozen into perfect consumer-ready blocks, all within hours of being pulled from the sea. This vessel doesn't need to race back to port with its catch packed in ice. It can stay out on the fishing grounds for months at a time. a self-contained, relentlessly efficient city of slaughter. From the Icelandic shore, you watch these new sea monsters take their position amongst the already dense flotilla of foreign vessels. Your own marine scientists are confirming your worst fears. They are measuring the fish being landed, and the data is terrifying. The average size of a cod is shrinking dramatically. The big, old, prolific spawners, the monster cod of legend that are crucial to replenishing the stock, are almost gone. You are now catching what are essentially juvenile fish, taking them out of the ecosystem before they've even had a chance to reproduce. This isn't sustainable harvesting. This is ecological strip mining. The post-war world is hungry. Europe is rebuilding, and the demand for cheap protein is immense. Britain, struggling with war debt and the beginnings of a crumbling empire, clings to its fishing industry as a point of pride and an economic necessity. The government in London is in no mood to listen to conservation warnings from a tiny island nation of 150,000 people. The stage is now perfectly set for a collision. On one side, a centuries-old maritime law that favors the powerful. On the other, a small nation's desperate need for survival. In the middle, a fish population buckling under the weight of technological prowess it cannot escape. You are sitting in the Althing, the Icelandic parliament, a building of quiet dignity in the heart of Reykjavik. The speeches have been made. The scientific reports have been read. The diplomatic cables to London have gone unanswered. The time for pleading has passed. A consensus, forged in desperation and national pride, settles over the chamber. A vote is taken. A new law is passed. You have decided that if the world's laws will not protect you, you will create your own. A line has just been drawn in the sea and the storm has officially made landfall. The vote is cast. The law is passed. The decision made in the quiet wood-paneled chamber of the Icelandic parliament now ripples outwards, a seismic shockwave aimed at the foundations of international maritime law. But this is not your first move. You are wiser than to go from a standstill to a full sprint. You've tested the waters already. Back in 1952, you took a cautious first step, unilaterally extending your fishing limits from the traditional 3 miles to 4. More importantly, you declared that this line would be measured not by following every twist and turn of your complex fjord-carved coastline, but by drawing straight baselines from headland to headland. This seemingly technical change had a massive effect, enclosing huge bays and fjords that had previously been considered international waters. The British protested, of course. Their fishing industry organized a boycott of Icelandic fish landings in their ports, a move that hurt your economy but also hardened your resolve. Ultimately, they grumbled, but they did not send warships. You learned a valuable lesson. The British lion's roar was perhaps worse than its bite. Now, 6 years later, in 1958, you are ready for the main event. The 4-mile limit has proven to be little more than a paper fence against the industrial might of the foreign fleets. Your scientific advisors are telling you that the most critical cod nurseries, the shallow grounds where the young fish mature, lie just beyond it. So you take the plunge. You announce to the United Nations and the world that as of September 1st, 1958, Iceland's exclusive fisheries limit will be extended to 12 nautical miles. 12. Not 5, not 6. A full 12-mile zone. It's a tripling of your previous claim and a quadrupling of the internationally accepted standard. It is a direct, unambiguous, and profoundly defiant challenge to the entire maritime world order. You are, however, extremely clever in how you phrase it. Your diplomats and lawyers have been working overtime. You know that if you declare a 12-mile territorial sea, you are claiming absolute sovereignty over that water. This would give you the right to restrict the passage of military vessels, a move that would instantly turn your NATO allies, especially the United States and Britain, completely against you, so you don't do that. Instead, you use a carefully chosen, innovative phrase. You declare a fisheries conservation zone. The distinction is subtle but brilliant. You are essentially telling the world, we are not claiming to own this water. Your destroyers and your submarines are free to pass through as they please. We are not interfering with the freedom of navigation. But if you are a fishing boat, you may not drop your nets. This is a conservation matter, not a military one. It's a masterful piece of legal jujitsu, forcing the argument to be about fish, not warships, and framing you as a responsible steward of the environment. It's like telling your neighbor he can use your driveway to turn his car around, but he's not allowed to park there and set up a garage sale. Your public justification is built on a mountain of data. You present charts showing the declining size of cod. You publish studies on the importance of the spawning grounds you are now trying to protect. You frame your action not as a nationalistic land grab, but as a desperate, logical, and scientifically backed measure to save a shared resource from total collapse due to the unchecked greed of others. In the court of world opinion, you are positioning yourself as the progressive, rational party. In London, the news is met with sputtering outrage. You are a senior official in the British Foreign Office, and the cable from Reykjavik feels like a slap in the face. The audacity is breathtaking. The powerful British Trawlers Federation is screaming for action, predicting the ruin of their industry. Newspaper editorials mock the Icelanders for their arrogance. The consensus within the British government is clear. This is an illegal act. It violates centuries of customary international law, and worse, if you let Iceland get away with it, what's to stop every other small coastal nation from doing the same? The whole principle of the freedom of the seas would unravel. This cannot stand. International law scholars still debate whether Iceland's unilateral move was a reckless act of maritime piracy that threatened the entire legal order of the seas, or a progressive and necessary catalyst that dragged an archaic legal system into the 20th century. Was Iceland a rogue state, tearing up the rule book for its own selfish gain? Or was it a visionary, forcing the world to confront the fact that the old rules were no longer fit for purpose in an age of sonar and factory trawlers? As the summer of 1958 wears on, the tension builds. In the Icelandic port of Ísafjörður, you watch as the small gray-painted patrol boats of the Coast Guard take on extra fuel and supplies. The mood is anxious but determined. In the English port of Hull, you stand on the dockside as a giant trawler, the Northern Foam, prepares to set sail. Its captain gives a defiant interview to the press, vowing that no one will stop him from fishing in waters his father and grandfather fished before him. The trawler owners announce that their ships will sail in convoys for safety, and they formally request protection from the Royal Navy. The final hours of August 31st tick away. You are on the bridge of the Icelandic patrol vessel Thor, cutting through a calm sea under a sky that won't get fully dark. Your radar screen is a mess of blips just inside the new 12-mile line. The British fleet. They are holding their position, daring you. As the clock strikes midnight, the new law comes into effect. A few minutes later, you see it through your binoculars. On the deck of a distant trawler, the winches start to turn, and the huge trawl doors are swung out. They are shooting their nets. It's a deliberate, calculated act of defiance. The voice of your captain comes over the ship's intercom, calm and steady. He gives a new course and a new speed. You are closing the distance. The first Cod War has begun. You are the captain of the Icelandic patrol vessel Thor, and your moment of truth has arrived. You've closed the distance to the British trawler, the Northern Foam. Its crew lines the rail, watching you approach with a mixture of curiosity and defiance. The trawler's heavy nets are in the water, churning up a muddy wake, a clear violation of the law you are sworn to uphold. You raise the loudhailer, your voice booming unnaturally across the 100 yards of choppy water between your ships. You state your name, your vessel, and you issue the order, clear and firm. You are fishing illegally inside the fisheries limits of Iceland. Haul in your gear and leave the area immediately, or your vessel will be arrested. For a long moment, the only sounds are the cry of the gulls and the thrum of your engines. The skipper of the Northern Foam, a burly man in a thick woolen jumper, cups his hands around his mouth. His reply is indistinct, carried away by the wind, but the tone is universally understood. It's a clear and profound no. He's not moving. You have a small cannon mounted on your bow, but your orders are explicit. Do not fire on unarmed civilian vessels. So you are in a standoff, a stalemate of wills. You begin to maneuver your boat, planning to get a line across to his, perhaps to try and foul his propeller. This is going to be difficult and dangerous. Then, something else commands your attention. Another vessel is emerging from the persistent North Atlantic haze. It's long, sleek, and knife-sharp at the bow. It's painted the color of a storm cloud, and it's moving with a speed and purpose that makes your repurposed trawler feel like a bathtub toy. As it draws closer, you see the unmistakable silhouette of a naval warship and the white ensign of the British Royal Navy snapping crisply at its mast. It's a Type 12 frigate, a state-of-the-art submarine hunter armed with cannons, depth charges, and the quiet menace of a nation that once ruled the waves. It doesn't hail you. It doesn't need to. It simply slides between you and the trawler, a huge, impassive wall of gray steel. The message is as clear as a signal lamp. This vessel is under our protection. Stand down. This is not a spontaneous act of an overzealous commander. This is Operation Politour, the British government's official response. Back in London, the Admiralty has enacted a full-scale naval operation with a single, clear objective: to protect the British fishing fleet while it openly and systematically breaks Icelandic law. This is not a token gesture. It is a massive deployment of military force. Over the course of the conflict, more than 50 Royal Navy warships will be rotated through these waters: frigates, destroyers, minesweepers, and support tankers. At its height, the force arrayed against your tiny Icelandic Coast Guard is larger than many national navies. All of this, the immense cost, the diplomatic fallout, the military risk, is for Cod. On board the Northern Foam, the mood transforms from tense defiance to jubilant confidence. You are a British trawlerman now, and the cavalry has arrived. The sight of that sleek, powerful warship sitting off your port quarter is the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. You feel safe, protected, and vindicated. The Icelandic patrol boat, which seemed so intimidating minutes ago, now looks tiny and insignificant. The radio crackles to life. Your skipper gets on the VHF, not to talk to the Navy, but to taunt the Icelanders. Soon other trawlers join in. They start broadcasting patriotic music, with Rule Britannia being a particular favorite, the tinny sound drifting across the waves in a bizarre act of psychological warfare. You are a civilian fisherman, tough and hardy, but you are now a pawn in a military chess game, and the thrill of it is undeniable. Military historians still debate whether the Royal Navy's tactics during Operation Politour were a restrained and proportionate response to protect civilian lives and property, or a classic heavy-handed act of 19th century gunboat diplomacy, clumsily deployed in the Cold War era. Was this a genuine police action, carefully managed to avoid escalation? Or was it a calculated display of overwhelming force designed to bully and intimidate a much smaller NATO ally into submission? From your perspective on the receiving end, it feels unequivocally like the latter. A strange and dangerous routine quickly falls into place. The Royal Navy organizes the dozens of British trawlers into a tight convoy, a floating box. The warships then patrol the perimeter of this box, acting as armed shepherds. Your job, as the Icelandic Coast Guard, is to somehow break through this naval screen to get to the trawlers and make an arrest. The British warships, in turn, have the job of blocking you without opening fire. It becomes a surreal, high-stakes game of maritime chicken. Your small boat will charge towards a gap in the formation, only to have a 1,000-ton frigate maneuver to cut you off, its bull wave washing over your decks. The sheer absurdity of the situation is hard to ignore. Two founding members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, allies sworn to defend each other from the Soviet Union, are now engaged in a daily, hostile confrontation. Somewhere over the horizon, you can be sure that Soviet surveillance ships, probably disguised as trawlers themselves, are listening and watching this intra-NATO squabble with immense satisfaction. You can almost picture a KGB analyst in Moscow shaking his head in disbelief, writing a report that says, "Comrade General, it appears the capitalists are actually going to war with each other, over fish." For you, the captain of the Thor, the feeling is one of profound frustration. You are legally in the right. This is your water according to your laws. But your law is rendered meaningless by the presence of a superior military force. You cannot shoot. You cannot risk a direct confrontation with a warship that could absorb a collision with your vessel as a minor dent, while the same impact would rip your hull open. The British have called your bluff. They have placed their queen on the board to protect their pawns, and you have no pieces powerful enough to challenge it. The line you drew in the water is still there, but now a fleet of gray-hulled warships is sitting right on top of it, and your government in Reykjavik has to figure out what to do next. Your position as an Icelandic Coast Guard captain is an exercise in managed futility. The Royal Navy has you boxed out, their frigates acting like perfectly synchronized, 1,000-ton sheepdogs, keeping you, the lone wolf, away from their flock of trawlers. A direct challenge is suicide. So, you adapt. If you cannot be a wolf, you will be a mosquito. A relentless, annoying, inescapable mosquito. This is how the first Cod War is fought. Not with shells and torpedoes, but with harassment, nerve, and sheer bloody-minded persistence. Your daily routine becomes a bizarre, high-stakes ballet. You are back on the patrol boat Thor. At dawn, you approach the trawler box. You identify a potential weak spot in the naval screen, a gap between two frigates. Then you charge. Your engine roars to life as you make a feint towards one trawler, forcing the nearest warship to move to intercept you. As it commits, you suddenly change course, cutting back across its wake, aiming for another trawler on the far side of the box. It's a game of bluff and maneuver, testing the reaction times of the British commanders. The goal is to get close enough to a trawler to shout at it through a loudhailer, to be a visible legal presence to remind the skipper that he is breaking the law, even if his government's navy is helping him do it. The stress is immense. You are operating in some of the world's most dangerous seas, often in gale force winds and high waves. A minor engine failure, a small miscalculation of speed or distance while maneuvering between these giant steel hulls, could be catastrophic. Sleep comes in snatched, anxious hours. Nerves are frayed raw. The constant tension is punctuated by moments of pure, farcical absurdity. Since you can't use your cannons, you turn to a different kind of weapon system, the fire hose. You uncoil the heavy canvas hose, and with a roar from the pumps, a powerful jet of freezing Atlantic seawater erupts from the nozzle. You aim it at the bridge of a British trawler, trying to shatter the windows or simply blind the helmsman. The British crew, never ones to back down from a fight, respond in kind. Soon you're engaged in a ridiculous aquatic duel, two boats blasting each other with water like a pair of angry children with super soakers. Sometimes, even the crews of the Royal Navy frigates, perhaps out of sheer boredom, can't resist joining in, their own powerful hoses adding to the chaos. It's a strange, almost comical spectacle of non-lethal aggression, a way to vent frustration when real violence is off the table. Inevitably, the close-quarters maneuvering leads to contact. It's not yet the deliberate, aggressive ramming that will define later conflicts. It's a bump, a scrape. As you try to shoulder your way past a frigate to get to a trawler, your hull makes contact with its. There's a horrifying, drawn-out shriek of tortured metal, a shudder that runs through your entire vessel. Alarms ring. Men shout. For a moment, everyone holds their breath, checking for serious damage. Usually it's just scraped paint and dented plates, but it's a terrifying reminder that the line between posturing and disaster is razor thin. Then on November 12, 1958, the phony war very nearly turns real. You are on the crew of the Icelandic patrol vessel Aegir. For hours you have been chasing a particularly stubborn British trawler, the Painter. The usual warnings have been ignored. The captain of the Aegir, a man at the end of his patience, decides to escalate. He orders the gun crew to fire warning shots. The first few are blanks, just thunderous noise. The Painter continues to fish. Then comes the order that changes everything. Load a live round. It's a single, solid, non-explosive practice shell. A shot across the bow. The 3-inch gun cracks, a sharp, angry sound that is utterly different from the day's usual noises. The shell whistles over the trawler. On the Painter's bridge, there is panic. On the nearby frigate HMS Russell, klaxons blare. They believe they are under genuine attack. The warship's main turrets swing around, its guns trained directly on your small vessel. For a few heart-stopping minutes, the North Atlantic holds its breath. A full-blown naval battle between two NATO allies is seconds away. The moment stretches, then breaks. The Russell does not fire. Your captain does not give the order to fire again. Frantic messages fly between the ships and their respective commands in London and Reykjavik. The incident shocks both sides into a moment of clarity. This silly war could actually get people killed. Diplomatic historians still argue whether the conflict remained low-level because of a deep-seated, mutual desire to avoid bloodshed between allies, Or simply because neither government could devise a viable escalation strategy? Was it restraint, born of a shared culture and alliance? Or was it tactical paralysis, a mutual recognition that the next step up the ladder was an unthinkable, politically ruinous absurdity? Whatever the reason, after the Aegir incident, the intensity ratchets down a notch. But the conflict grinds on. It becomes a war of economics and endurance. Can your tiny nation afford the fuel and maintenance to keep its 3 or 4 patrol boats at sea constantly? Can the British trawler bosses afford the sky-high insurance premiums and the lower catch rates that come from fishing while being perpetually harassed? Can the British government continue to justify the enormous cost of a major naval deployment to its taxpayers, all to protect a few hundred fishermen? The conflict has settled into a weary, monotonous stalemate. You are a sailor on one of these ships, British or Icelandic, it hardly matters. You are tired, you are cold, you are wet, and you are sick of the sight of the other nation's boats. The gray sea and the gray sky have become the backdrop for a seemingly endless, pointless drama of stubborn pride. The stalemate is a dripping tap of resources and morale. You are a sailor, it doesn't matter on which side, and the endless gray days of close quarters maneuvering and pointless water fights have bled the conflict of any glamour it might have once had. This war of attrition, this strange, cold, saltwater siege cannot last forever. The side that breaks will not be the one with the weaker ships, but the one with the weaker will. And while the battle is being fought at sea, the war is about to be won on land, in the accounting offices of London, the diplomatic suites of Washington, and the newspapers of the world. You are now a minister in the British government sitting in a stuffy office in Whitehall. In front of you is a balance sheet and the numbers are making your eyes water. Operation Politour, the naval deployment to protect the trawlers, is costing a fortune. The fuel consumption alone is staggering. The wear and tear on some of the Royal Navy's most advanced anti-submarine frigates, which are being used as glorified maritime police cars, is immense. The British taxpayer is funding a multi-million-pound operation, and for what? So the price of fish and chips doesn't go up by a few pennies? The press, which had been so jingoistic at the start, is now running stories questioning the cost and the wisdom of using the Navy to bully a tiny friendly nation. The whole affair is transforming from a bold defense of British rights into a protracted and very expensive embarrassment. Meanwhile, across the ocean in Washington, D.C., you are a State Department analyst, and this North Atlantic squabble is giving you a serious headache. Your job is to manage the Cold War, and this Cod War is a dangerously stupid distraction. The single most important piece of real estate in the entire region is the NATO air and naval base at Keflavik, Iceland. From there, American and NATO forces monitor the Guk Gap, the stretch of ocean between Greenland, Iceland, and the UK, through which every Soviet submarine must pass to get into the Atlantic. Keflavik is the cork in the bottle, and now 2 of your most crucial NATO allies are in a state of near-open conflict, souring the very relationship that makes the base viable. You start making quiet, insistent phone calls to your counterparts in London. The message is polite, but firm. Fix this. We don't care how. Just make it stop. While Britain is feeling the pressure from its bankers and its biggest ally, you, as an Icelandic diplomat, are playing your own hand brilliantly. You know you can never win a naval battle, so you open a new front, public relations. You are David, the small, peaceful, nature-loving shepherd, standing up to the hulking imperial Goliath. You give interviews to the international press where you talk not of fishing quotas, but of conservation, of protecting the beautiful, vulnerable life of the sea from industrial greed. You speak of your nation's long struggle for independence and its right to control its own destiny. In the post-colonial atmosphere of the late 1950s, this narrative is pure gold. The story of a tiny nation defending its home against a former empire resonates around the world, and international sympathy swings decisively to your side. Faced with these mounting pressures, the British government's resolve begins to crack. Historians still debate whether Britain's decision to finally come to the negotiating table was primarily driven by the crippling financial cost of Operation Politour, the relentless diplomatic pressure from the United States to resolve the strategically embarrassing dispute, or a genuine, albeit reluctant, acceptance that the old 3-mile rule was no longer defensible in the modern era. In truth, it was a toxic cocktail of all three. The political, financial, and diplomatic price of continuing the fight had simply become too high. In early 1961, the two sides sit down in a room to hammer out a deal. You can feel the tension. The British delegation is bitter, feeling they were forced to the table. The Icelanders are quietly triumphant but know they cannot overplay their hand. The result is a masterpiece of face-saving diplomacy that amounts to a total Icelandic victory. The United Kingdom formally agrees to recognize Iceland's 12 nautical mile fishing limit. This is the grand prize, the core of the entire dispute. In exchange, to give the British fishing industry time to adjust, Iceland grants them a temporary 3-year right to continue fishing in the outer 6-mile band of the new zone, and only during certain times of the year. Back in Reykjavik, the news is met with national jubilation. Church bells ring. You have faced down the British Empire and won. You have proven that a small nation, through stubbornness and shrewd diplomacy, can shape its own fate. The victory becomes a cornerstone of your modern national identity, a source of immense pride. In the English fishing port of Grimsby, the mood is funereal. You are a trawlerman who has spent months in the cold, dangerous waters, believing your government had your back. Now you feel utterly betrayed. The politicians in London have sold you out. The transitional period feels like a hollow joke. You know that in 3 years, the fishing grounds that your family has worked for a century will be closed to you forever. An uneasy peace settles over the fishing grounds. The gray warships disappear over the horizon. The cat-and-mouse games stop. For now, the war is over. But as you look at the calendar, you realize the 1961 agreement is not a permanent solution. It's a 3-year ceasefire. The fundamental conflict, Iceland's need to conserve and Britain's need to catch, has not been resolved. It has merely been postponed. The countdown to the Second Cod War has already begun. The technological arms race of the 1960s has pushed you, as an Icelander, to a stark conclusion. You are in a fight you cannot win with technology. For every conservation measure you take, the foreign fleets develop a new piece of equipment that renders it obsolete. You cannot build bigger boats or better sonar than the shipyards of Britain and West Germany. To try and compete on those terms would bankrupt your nation. So you must change the terms of the fight itself. You must change the battlefield. And the only way to do that is to move the borders. The political will for this move crystallizes in 1971, when a new left-leaning government coalition comes to power in Iceland. Unlike the previous, more conservative government, this new coalition has no qualms about picking another fight. In fact, they were elected on an explicit promise to do so. Their platform includes a clear, unambiguous pledge to extend the fishing limits and save the cod stocks once and for all. For them, it is not a matter of choice but of national duty. The moment arrives on a gray day in Reykjavik in early 1972. You are in the Althing, the parliament, and the air is thick with historical gravity. The Minister of Fisheries, Ludvig Josefsson, a formidable and determined figure, stands to address the chamber. He announces the government's formal decision. On September 1st of that year, Iceland's fisheries jurisdiction will be extended from 12 to 50 nautical miles. 50. The number hangs in the air, a declaration of defiance so audacious it borders on reckless. This isn't an incremental adjustment, this is a quantum leap. A 50-mile zone will enclose some of the richest and most historic fishing grounds in the entire North Atlantic, areas that have been considered international waters for 1,000 years. It is an act designed to provoke a massive confrontation. Your government knows this, and it prepares the diplomatic battlefield with the precision of a military campaign. Learning from the last conflict, you don't just let the legal announcement drop into the world's lap. You launch a preemptive public relations blitz. You commission and publish a detailed 48-page booklet, professionally printed in English, under the simple title, Iceland's Fishery Limits. It is a masterpiece of political communication. Inside are maps, charts showing declining fish sizes, scientific data from your marine biologists, historical precedents, and a passionate legal and moral argument for your position. A copy is sent to every foreign embassy in Reykjavik, to the editors of every major newspaper in Europe and North America, and to delegates at the United Nations. You are making your case to the world, framing the coming conflict on your terms, a matter of ecological survival, not aggressive expansion. In London, the arrival of this booklet and the official diplomatic notice is met with a weary, predictable fury. It's déjà vu all over again, but the stakes are much, much higher. You are back in the British Foreign Office. The 12-mile limit, while painful, had left significant fishing grounds open to your fleets. But the 50-mile line is a dagger aimed at the heart of the British deep-sea fishing industry. It encompasses the prime grounds where the vast majority of their catch is taken. For the trawler bosses in Hull and Grimsby, this isn't just a restriction, it's an eviction notice. They declare the Icelandic claim to be an act of piracy and demand that the government protect them, just as it did before. The British government, now led by Prime Minister Edward Heath, finds itself in an impossible position. To concede would be to sacrifice a major domestic industry. To fight would mean another costly, embarrassing, and potentially violent confrontation with a NATO ally. The geopolitical landscape has shifted since the First War. The Icelandic argument, which seemed radical in 1958, is now finding echoes around the world. Several South American nations have already laid claim to 200-mile maritime zones to protect their own resources. The old legal consensus is crumbling. Britain is no longer defending a universally accepted norm. It is trying to hold back a rising global tide of resource nationalism. Political scientists still debate whether the 1972 extension was a calculated and confident risk by the Icelandic government, emboldened by their previous success, or an act of pure political desperation. Were you cleverly riding the wave of changing international law, sensing that history was on your side? Or were you simply cornered, with the herring gone and the cod going, forced to make a wild all-or-nothing gamble because you had no other moves left to play? From your perspective, it feels like both. It is a bold risk born of utter necessity. The last-ditch diplomatic meetings in the summer of 1972 are a dialogue of the deaf. The British offer compromises. We'll limit our number of trawlers. We'll agree to a total allowable catch. Your Icelandic negotiators listen politely and then refuse. Your position is absolute and non-negotiable. The 50-mile zone is a conservation area. Its purpose is to allow the fish stocks to recover. That cannot happen if a fleet of foreign factory trawlers is still operating within it. The talks collapse. As midnight on August 31, 1972, approaches, the atmosphere is electric with menace. The phony war of 1958, with its fire hoses and shouted insults, seems almost quaint now. The lessons have been learned on both sides. The British trawlers steam towards the new 50-mile line, vowing to cross it. The Royal Navy is on standby. But you, on the bridge of the Icelandic patrol vessel Aegir, are not just planning to chase and shout. You have spent the last decade preparing for this day. You have a new tactic, a new philosophy of enforcement, and locked away in a storage compartment on your deck is a new piece of equipment, a deceptively simple tool of naval warfare that you are about to unleash upon the British fleet. This time, there will be no warning shots. This time, you will cripple them. September 1st, 1972. The deadline has passed. You are on the bridge of the Icelandic patrol vessel Odin, and on your radar screen, you can see the bright blips of the British trawler fleet. They have made good on their promise. They are crossing the new 50-mile line, their nets already in the water, a flotilla of defiance. Your orders are clear. You must enforce the law. You push the throttle forward, your small vessel cutting through the waves towards the intruders. This time, however, there is no sign of the Royal Navy. The horizon is empty, save for the fishing boats. For a moment, you wonder if the British have simply decided not to contest the issue. This hope is quickly dashed. As you get closer, you see that the trawlers are not alone. They are being shepherded by a new kind of bodyguard. These are not sleek, gray warships. They are huge, muscular, civilian deep-sea tugboats. Vessels with names like Statesman, Englishman, and Lloydsman. These are the titans of the commercial ocean, boats designed to salvage stricken oil rigs in North Sea storms and tow container ships across the Pacific. They are immensely powerful, surprisingly fast, and built with reinforced hulls designed to withstand incredible punishment. The British government, wary of the cost and bad press that came with deploying the Royal Navy in 1958, has tried a new tactic. They have effectively hired a private navy of civilian muscle to protect the fleet. So the first phase of the Second Cod War is a bizarre confrontation you could never have predicted. Frigates versus fishing boats. No, it's far stranger. It is Icelandic Coast Guard versus British trawler bodyguards. Your patrol boat is dwarfed by these ocean-going tugs. Engaging with them is like a police car trying to nudge a runaway dump truck off the road. They are not warships, which lowers the political stakes of a collision, but they are incredibly solid and formidable opponents. Their captains every bit as skilled and stubborn as you are. The early days of the conflict become a chaotic, swirling melee of trawlers, tugs, and patrol boats, all maneuvering dangerously in the crowded, unforgiving waters. Back home in Iceland, this struggle becomes a national obsession. You are a schoolchild in Reykjavik, and the Cod War is the backdrop to your entire life. You don't follow football scores, you follow the radio reports from the sea. The names of the Coast Guard vessels, Odin, Aegir, Thor, are as familiar to you as the names of your friends. The captains are national heroes, their stoic, salty faces staring out from the front pages of the newspapers. Their exploits are a source of immense pride, a real-life saga unfolding in real time. The entire nation, from the fishermen to the farmers to the bankers in the city, is united behind these brave crews. This is a people's war, and that unified resolve is a weapon the British consistently fail to appreciate. On the high seas, it is becoming clear that the British tugboat strategy is not working. Historians and strategists still debate whether Britain's initial hesitation to deploy the Royal Navy was a sophisticated attempt at de-escalation, trying to keep the conflict civilian to civilian, or a major strategic miscalculation. From your Icelandic perspective, it looks like a fatal underestimation of your new tactics. The tugs can block and they can shoulder your vessel away from a trawler, but there are dozens of trawlers and only a handful of tugs. Your patrol boats are more nimble, and crucially, you are not trying to arrest the trawlers this time. You are doing something far more effective, something the tugs are powerless to stop. The British trawler industry is hemorrhaging money. Their multi-thousand-pound nets are being ruined, their fishing time is being disrupted, and their catches are plummeting. The private navy of tugs has failed. The pressure mounts on the government of Prime Minister Edward Heath. The fishing unions and trawler owners are in open revolt, demanding proper military protection. The experiment in privatized warfare is over. Reluctantly, in May 1973, 9 long months after the conflict began, London gives the order. The Royal Navy is coming back. Once again, the horizon fills with the menacing gray shapes of warships. This time it is a mix of modern frigates, Leander-class, Rothesay-class, and the brand-new gas turbine-powered Type 21s. They arrive with a grim sense of purpose. The phony war is over. The polite pretenses are gone. Their mission is to stop you, Iceland's Coast Guard, by any means short of opening fire. The battlefield becomes even more dangerously crowded. Now you must contend with the trawlers, the giant tugs, and a screen of state-of-the-art warships. The ballet of 1958 is replaced by a full-contact brawl. The game is fundamentally different now. The Icelandic tactics are more aggressive, forcing the Royal Navy to be more aggressive in response. The ships are faster, the encounters more violent, the tempers far shorter. When your patrol boat makes a run at a trawler, a British frigate doesn't just block you. It tries to steer you off course to get in your way with a palpable sense of menace. The risk of a serious, life-threatening collision is now a constant, daily reality. The British have escalated, bringing their full military might to bear. They believe this show of force will be decisive. They believe they can intimidate you into submission. They are wrong. They have brought their frigates, but they still don't understand the new weapon you have brought to the fight. The return of the Royal Navy creates an imposing spectacle on the horizon, a clear signal of Britain's intent. Their commanders are confident. They have faced you before, and they believe they know the script. Their job is to form a protective shield around their trawlers to block and intimidate your small patrol boats, and to slowly, patiently, grind you down until your government gives in. It is a solid, proven strategy, and you are about to make it completely, utterly obsolete. This is because your strategic objective has changed. You, as the Icelandic Coast Guard, have realized that the goal of the first Cod War, to physically board and arrest a trawler, is impossible when the Royal Navy is present. It is like trying to give a parking ticket to a car while it's surrounded by a convoy of armored trucks. So you have developed a new doctrine. You will not target the ship. You will not target the crew. You will target the trawl. You will attack their ability to fish to make money. You will cripple them economically, one boat at a time. And to do this, you have invented a secret weapon. You are on the aft deck of the patrol boat Thor. Two of your crewmates are manhandling a piece of equipment that looks like something forged in a medieval dungeon. It is a heavy, four-pronged grapnel, but with a sinister modification. On one side, a V-shaped notch has been carved out, and into this notch a blade of hardened, sharpened steel has been fixed. This is the Landhelgisklippen, literally the territorial waters clipper, or as the British will soon come to call it with a mixture of fury and grudging respect, the net cutter. It is a tool of elegant, brutal simplicity. Now you are on the bridge with the captain, and you are beginning an attack run. Up ahead, a British trawler is steaming along slowly, its massive trawl net dragging along the seabed a mile behind it. The net is connected to the trawler by two immensely thick steel cables, or warps, each one as thick as your wrist and under thousands of pounds of tension. Your target is not the boat, it is those two cables. You ignore the trawler itself and steer your vessel to pass behind it, aiming to cross its wake. Immediately, a British frigate and a heavy tug surge forward to intercept you. This is the dance. They think you are trying to get to the trawler's stern. You are not. You are deliberately drawing them out of position. At the correct moment, the crew on the aft deck drops the net cutter into the sea. It's attached to your own heavy tow line and it sinks below the waves. Now comes the hard part. You must execute a perfectly timed turn, dragging the submerged cutter directly across the path of the trawler's invisible, submerged warps. The British frigate is trying to ram you, its bow wave crashing over your small vessel. The tug is trying to cut you off. It is a terrifying high-speed, high-stakes geometry problem, and a mistake of a few feet could result in a fatal collision. But your helmsman is an artist. You feel a sudden, violent jolt, a deep shudder that runs through the very keel of your ship. It's the cutter. It has snagged a warp. The steel cable, humming with the tension of dragging a 60-ton net, is forced into the V-shaped jaw of the cutter. The cable's own immense tension becomes the force that destroys it. Against the hardened blade, the thick steel cable doesn't stand a chance. It parts with an explosive bang that you can feel more than hear. Now you are on the British trawler. One moment you are listening to the familiar groan of the winches. The next, a sound like a cannon shot echoes from the stern. The entire ship lurches violently to one side. A high-pitched alarm screams from the winch control panel, indicating a catastrophic loss of tension on the starboard warp. You have lost your gear. The severed cable whips back dangerously, but the trawl itself, the net, the heavy otter boards, the electronic sensors, is gone. It is now a heap of twisted metal and synthetic mesh lying on the bottom of the Atlantic. The financial loss is devastating. A complete set of trawl gear can cost the equivalent of tens of thousands of dollars, and you will lose days of fishing time steaming back to port to get a replacement. The first few times this happens, the British fleet is mystified. The skippers report that their gear must have snagged on an uncharted rock or a shipwreck. The idea that this is a deliberate act, that the Icelanders possess a specific weapon for this purpose, seems impossible. But the accidents keep happening, always in the presence of an Icelandic patrol boat. The secret is out. Naval historians still debate whether the net cutter should be classified as a simple tool of maritime law enforcement, like a police officer's spike strip, or a de facto weapon of naval warfare. It was designed not to harm people, but to destroy hugely expensive private property and to disable a vessel's primary economic function from a distance. This brilliant legal gray area is precisely what made it so effective. It inflicted a crippling blow without firing a shot, making a massive military retaliation seem disproportionate and absurd. The cutters have changed the entire nature of the war. The Royal Navy's defensive box is now useless. You have bypassed their shield. Now, to protect their trawlers, the frigates and tugs have to stop you from getting behind them. The conflict transforms from a stately, non-contact blockade into a series of frantic, close-quarters brawls, where ramming and aggressive blocking become the only counters to your devastating new weapon. You have given David a slingshot, and it is aimed squarely at Goliath's wallet. The invention of the net cutter presents the Royal Navy with a maddening tactical problem. Your previous strategy, forming a passive, defensive screen around the trawlers, is now as effective as building a fortress wall with a gaping hole in the back. The Icelanders are not trying to get through you, they are going around you. To protect the trawler's expensive gear, you, as the commander of a British frigate, must now abandon your stately defensive posture. You have to become a proactive, aggressive interceptor. Your mission is to prevent the Icelandic patrol boats from ever getting behind a trawler. And the only tool you have to guarantee that is the oldest weapon in naval history, the ram. What follows is the birth of a terrifying and brutal maritime art form. This is not about accidental bumps and scrapes in bad weather. This is the art of the strategic collision. It is the deliberate use of your ship's 2,000-ton mass as a weapon, a physical instrument to enforce your government's will. You see an Icelandic patrol boat, the Auden, making a high-speed cutting run. Your target is a trawler a mile away. You plot an intercept course. Your gas turbine engines scream as your frigate accelerates, a huge wave peeling back from your bow. On the bridge of the Auden, you see the frigate coming for you, and you are faced with an impossible choice. Abandon your attack or hold your course and brace for impact. You hold your course. The distance between the two vessels closes with terrifying speed. You are on one of the bridges, it doesn't matter which. The world shrinks to the view through the front window. There is the other ship growing larger and larger, no longer a vessel but a wall of steel. There are shouts, the frantic spinning of the helm, the scream of the engines. There is no possibility of avoiding it now. The moment of impact is a sensory explosion, a deafening, gut-wrenching noise of tearing, grinding metal. The entire ship shudders violently, as if it has struck a reef. Men are thrown from their feet, crashing into bulkheads. The lights flicker, alarms blare. For a long second, there is a stunned silence, followed by urgent calls for damage reports. This becomes the new violent reality of the Second Cod War. Dozens of these collisions occur, yet, miraculously, no one is killed. This is a testament to the incredible skill of the captains on both sides, who managed to turn potentially fatal head-on collisions into glancing, but still hugely damaging blows. The Icelanders, ever the innovators in this conflict, decide to lean into this new reality. You are standing on the docks in Reykjavik, watching the final outfitting of their newest patrol boat, the Thor. It is a powerful ship, but your eye is drawn to a specific feature: a thick, dark belt of heavily reinforced steel plating that runs along the hull, especially around the bow. This is not a standard design feature. The Thor has been purpose-built with the expectation of ramming. It is designed to be both a shield and a sword, able to absorb and deliver punishment. You are no longer just reacting to British aggression. You are building ships specifically designed for it. One of the most famous encounters involves your flagship, the Aegir, in a series of clashes with British frigates. You are on the Aegir as it is rammed by a warship. The bow crumples like a tin can, peeled back by the force of the impact. Seawater is pouring onto the deck. But the ship is compartmentalized, the crew is disciplined, and the damage is contained. You limp back to port, a wounded hero. In the shipyard, workers swarm over the vessel, working around the clock. In a display of incredible national effort, the entire crumpled bow is cut away and a new one is welded into place in a matter of days. The Aegir then sails right back out into the fight, a visible symbol of Iceland's refusal to be broken. Psychologists and military analysts still debate the psychology of the ram in these confrontations. When you, as a captain, are watching that other ship fill your windscreen, what goes into the final split-second decision not to turn away? Was it a purely rational, tactical decision? A cold calculation that a collision was the only way to fulfill your orders? Or was it a more primal, human reaction? A moment where months of accumulated stress, exhaustion, frustration, and nationalistic anger boiled over into a spontaneous act of aggression, a visceral desire to finally hit something, For the crews, the psychological toll is immense. They are living in a state of constant high-stakes tension. Every watch, every maneuver could end in a violent collision that could cripple the ship or kill them all. The sound of grinding steel becomes the conflict's terrible soundtrack. The amount of paint, filler, and welding rods being consumed by the shipyards in Hull and Reykjavik must have been staggering. It's a full-contact war where the only ordnance is the ship itself. This tactic represents a terrifying escalation. A ram is a deliberate act of violence. It is one step, one tiny miscalculation, away from a hull being breached below the waterline, a ship capsizing in the lethally cold water, or a fire breaking out. It pushes both sides so close to the brink of true catastrophe, raising the terrifying possibility that a captain, after seeing his ship crippled and his crewmates injured, might finally snap and give the order to open fire. The art of the ram has turned the North Atlantic into a demolition derby, and with every collision, the chances of someone getting killed are rising dramatically. The relentless, brutal rhythm of the ramming war has settled into a destructive stalemate. You are a sailor on either a British frigate or an Icelandic patrol boat. Your days are a blur of high-tension maneuvers, your nights filled with the uneasy sleep of men who know their thin steel hull is the only thing separating them from the freezing, black water. The conflict has become a physical and psychological grind, a demolition derby with no finish line in sight. It feels as if this violent, close-quarter struggle could go on forever. But the event that will ultimately break the deadlock is not another collision at sea. It happens thousands of miles away, in the dust and heat of a desert war, and its shockwaves will change the entire geopolitical chessboard. The date is October 6, 1973. As you are bracing for another cold day in the North Atlantic, the Yom Kippur War erupts in the Middle East. In retaliation for Western support of Israel, the Arab-led Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, makes a decision that sends the global economy into a tailspin. They declare an oil embargo against the West. Suddenly, the price of a barrel of oil doesn't just rise, it quadruples. The effect is immediate and catastrophic. You are now a civilian in London, waiting in an hours-long queue for petrol, your government talking about a 3-day work week to save energy. The crisis hits every corner of society, but it hits fuel-guzzling industries the hardest. Industries like, for instance, deep-sea fishing. The cost for a British trawler to simply get to the fishing grounds and back skyrockets, wiping out its already thin profit margins. And for your other major player, the Royal Navy, the situation is even worse. A Leander-class frigate is a magnificent piece of engineering, but its fuel economy is aggressively single-digit. The cost of keeping a fleet of warships on 24/7 patrol in the North Atlantic, which was already a severe strain on the British defense budget, now becomes ruinously, prohibitively expensive. But the 1973 oil crisis does more than just wreak economic havoc. It dramatically raises the temperature of the Cold War. The world suddenly feels like a much more dangerous and unstable place. In Washington and Brussels, the leaders of the Western Alliance are watching the Soviet Union, terrified that it will use the crisis to make an opportunistic move. In this new, high-stakes global environment, strategic assets become more precious than ever, and the most vital strategic asset in the entire North Atlantic is the NATO airbase at Keflavik, Iceland. It is the unsinkable aircraft carrier, the irreplaceable listening post that watches the every move of the Soviet Northern Fleet's nuclear submarines. You are now the Icelandic Prime Minister, Ólafur Jóhannesson. You are locked in this bitter, violent conflict with your supposed NATO ally. The economic argument is on your side. The scientific argument is on your side. But Britain's naval might is keeping you in a stalemate. Now, the oil crisis and the heightened Cold War tensions have handed you your trump card, and you decide to play it. Your government makes a stark public announcement. If the aggression from the Royal Navy does not cease, Iceland will have no choice but to begin the process of leaving NATO and closing the Keflavik base. This is not a polite diplomatic suggestion. It is a threat of the highest order. It sends a bolt of pure panic through the Pentagon and the White House. The Cod War, which many American strategists had dismissed as a ridiculous European squabble, is now a direct threat to the security of the United States. Losing Keflavik is unthinkable. It would effectively hand the keys to the North Atlantic to the Soviet Navy. The quiet, firm pressure Washington had been putting on London to find a resolution now becomes a frantic, non-negotiable demand. Geopolitical analysts still debate how seriously the Soviet Union considered exploiting this deep rift within NATO's northern flank. Did Soviet diplomats in Reykjavik offer quiet encouragement or promises of favorable trade deals to the powerful neutralist faction within your government? Or did they simply watch with glee from the sidelines, content to see two major capitalist powers locked in a bitter struggle, proving every piece of their own anti-Western propaganda? For the British government under Prime Minister Edward Heath, the situation has become untenable. You are being crippled economically by the oil crisis at home. You are being savaged diplomatically by the Americans, and you are still no closer to forcing the Icelanders to back down at sea. The game is up. In November 1973, a deal is struck. It is, officially, a temporary 2-year truce. The Royal Navy will withdraw from the disputed waters. In return, Iceland will allow a restricted number of smaller British trawlers to continue fishing in the zone, their total catch significantly limited. You are on the bridge of your patrol boat as you watch the last British frigate turn and steam away over the horizon. You have won. There is no other word for it. You did not win by outfighting the Royal Navy. You won because you understood that this was never just a fight about fish. It was a fight about sovereignty, and you leveraged your nation's unique geopolitical importance with masterful skill. The oil sheikhs of OPEC became your unwitting quartermasters, and the Cold War fears of the Pentagon became your most powerful diplomatic weapon. The Second Cod War is not officially over, but it has been put on pause. A tense, angry silence descends upon the sea, a ceasefire born not of goodwill, but of geopolitical blackmail. The ceasefire of 1973 is not a peace. It is a pause button. For 2 years, a tense, fragile quiet hangs over the North Atlantic, governed by a complex agreement that satisfies no one. The British trawlers allowed inside the 50-mile zone are limited in number and constantly monitored, their skippers chafing under the restrictions. For you, the Icelanders, their very presence feels like a temporary occupation, a reminder that the war is not truly won. The agreement is a ticking clock, counting down to its expiration in November 1975. As the date approaches, everyone knows the conflict is not over. The question is not if the fighting will resume, but on what terms. While your small patrol boats have been facing down British frigates, a much quieter and more profound revolution has been taking place in the carpeted conference halls of the United Nations. Since 1973, delegates from nearly every country on Earth have been engaged in the monumental task of the Third UN Conference on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS III. Their goal is nothing less than to write a complete constitution for the world's oceans, to replace the centuries of vague customs and the old cannon-shot rule with a single comprehensive treaty. You are a delegate at this conference, and you witness the birth of a radical new idea, championed by developing coastal nations. It's called the Exclusive Economic Zone, the EEZ. It is a concept that turns the old freedom of the seas doctrine on its head. The proposal is that a coastal nation should have exclusive, sovereign rights to all the economic resources, the fish in the water, the oil and gas beneath the seabed, out to a staggering distance of 200 nautical miles from its shore. To the old maritime powers like Britain, this sounds like heresy, but to you representing Iceland, it sounds like the future. It is the ultimate vindication of everything you have been fighting for. Suddenly, your claims don't seem radical at all. You are not a rogue state, you are simply ahead of the curve. As the 1975 deadline for the 2-year truce approaches, you, now part of a new, more centrist Icelandic government, see your chance. The scientific data from your marine biologist is as grim as ever. The cod stocks are hanging by a thread. The legal and diplomatic winds for the first time in history are blowing firmly at your back. You decide it is time to stop fighting skirmishes over 12 or 50 miles. It is time to end the war. In the summer of 1975, your government makes its final breathtaking move. You announce to the world that when the truce expires, Iceland will extend its exclusive fisheries jurisdiction to 200 nautical miles. 200. The number is almost impossible to comprehend. It is a zone that will encompass an area of the ocean 6 times the size of Iceland itself. It effectively nationalizes some of the richest fishing grounds on the planet. This is your ultimate gamble. It is a move so audacious that it will either become the new global standard, or it will provoke a conflict so violent it will make the ramming and net cutting of the last war look like a schoolyard shoving match. The new law will take effect on October 15, 1975. Legal scholars still debate whether Iceland was a pioneer or a pirate in its aggressive approach to maritime law. Were you a courageous visionary? A small state on the front lines, bravely forcing an archaic legal system to confront the realities of modern technology and ecology? Or were you a cynical opportunist, using the slow, grinding progress of the UN conference as a convenient justification for a massive, unilateral resource grab that, at the moment you made it, was still a violation of established international law? In London, the news is met with stunned disbelief and utter desperation. You are now Harold Wilson, the British Prime Minister. Your country is being battered by the worst economic crisis in a generation. Strikes are crippling the nation, inflation is rampant, and Britain is being called the sick man of Europe. The last thing you need is a third round of this ridiculous Cod War. But the 200-mile claim is not a negotiation point, it is an ultimatum. It would mean the complete and total exclusion of your deep-sea fleet from its primary fishing grounds. It would mean the death of the fishing industries in Hull, Grimsby, and Fleetwood. You are trapped. To concede is to condemn thousands of your own citizens to unemployment. To fight is to pour precious resources into another unwinnable, diplomatically disastrous conflict. The final frantic diplomatic negotiations in the autumn of 1975 are a farce. The British plead for a compromise, any compromise. You, the Icelandic foreign minister, politely but firmly refuse. Your position is absolute. The 200-mile EEZ is the emerging global consensus. It is an ecological necessity, and it is non-negotiable. With nothing left to lose, the British trawler industry announces its intention. They will fish on. They will ignore the 200-mile line, and they expect the protection of the Royal Navy. October 15, 1975. The day arrives. You are standing on the bridge of a British trawler as your captain makes a grim entry in his log, noting his position. 35 miles off the Icelandic coast, well inside the new illegal zone. At the same moment, you are on the bridge of the Icelandic patrol boat Thor, watching the radar screen fill with the blips of the approaching British fleet. Both sides are utterly convinced they are in the right. One is fighting for its future, the other for its history. The time for talking is over. The third Cod War, the most desperate and dangerous of them all, has just begun. The beginning of the third Cod War is not a slow burn. It is an immediate explosion. The lessons of the past have been learned, the tactics have been perfected, and the pretenses of civility have been stripped away. You are on the bridge of the Icelandic patrol boat Tyr on the very first day of the conflict. The British trawlers are inside the 200-mile limit and you have your orders. There are no hails, no shouted warnings. You simply identify your target, maneuver into position behind it, deploy the net cutter, and sever its warps. The conflict begins with the loud metallic crack of a parted steel cable, a sound that echoes across the water as a declaration. The time for games is over. This time, Britain's response is not hesitant or outsourced. It is immediate, overwhelming, and utterly serious. The Wilson government, backed into a corner, unleashes the full, conventional might of the Royal Navy. You are an officer in the Admiralty, and the deployment order you draft is for a small armada. A rotating force of over 20 frigates is committed to the operation, including the Navy's newest and most powerful escorts, the sleek, gas turbine-powered Type 21 Amazon class. These are joined by the large, formidable Rothesay and Leander-class frigates, a fleet of the biggest deep-sea tugs money can charter, and Royal Fleet auxiliary tankers to refuel the warships at sea, ensuring a constant 24/7 armed presence on the fishing grounds. This is Britain's last stand for cod, and they are holding nothing back. The result is a descent into a level of sustained, deliberate violence that makes the previous conflicts look tame. The Icelandic cutters are more brutally efficient than ever. The Royal Navy's orders are to stop them at all costs. This combustible mix leads to a frenzy of ramming incidents. In the short, brutal winter months of the war, there will be over 55 documented collisions. It is no longer a shocking anomaly. It is a daily tactic. You are a sailor on the frigate HMS Diomede, and the alarm for brace for impact becomes a sickeningly familiar sound. The nature of the ramming itself has changed. It is faster, harder, and more openly aggressive. The British frigates, much larger and more powerful than the Icelandic patrol boats, use their size to devastating effect. They perfect a terrifying maneuver that becomes their signature move. Military tacticians still debate the effectiveness of Britain's pass-through maneuver, a tactic of incredible risk and aggression. You are the captain of the frigate HMS Eastbourne, and you see the Icelandic Thor lining up for a cutting run. Instead of simply trying to block it, you push your engines to flank speed and aim to pass directly between the Thor and the trawler it's targeting. The goal is to use your ship's immense wake to violently disrupt the smaller vessel, throwing it off course. The margin for error is effectively zero. More often than not, it results in a high-speed glancing collision, a long screeching grind of steel on steel that rips open railings and gashes hulls. The bitterness of the conflict trickles down to the fishermen themselves. You are on the deck of a trawler from Fleetwood. You feel powerless watching these naval battles rage around you, your livelihood hanging in the balance. The frustration boils over into a desperate, visceral anger. You and your crewmates fashion your own crude weapons. You build giant, industrial-strength slingshots from surgical tubing and steel frames. And you fire heavy bolts, engine bearings, and chunks of scrap metal at the bridges of the Icelandic patrol boats as they pass. You trail tangled nets and heavy chains from your stern, hoping to foul their propellers. These are not the actions of professional combatants. They are the furious, desperate gestures of men who feel they have been pushed to the very edge. From the bridge of your Icelandic vessel, you are now facing a three-pronged attack. A frigate is attempting to ram you from starboard. A tug is trying to cut you off from port, and a hail of metal projectiles is clanging off your bridge windows, fired from the very trawler you are trying to police. The situation has devolved into something resembling a chaotic maritime bar fight. Picture the scene from above. On a gray, heaving patch of the North Atlantic, a dozen black-hulled trawlers are scattered, their nets out. Weaving between them are 2 or 3 of Iceland's white patrol boats. In response, 4 huge, brightly colored tugs and 3 gray, menacing Royal Navy frigates are in constant aggressive motion, charging and blocking. Wakes crisscross, sirens blare, and occasionally, the ugly sound of a collision carries across the water. The only people profiting from any of this are the ship repair yards in Reykjavik and Roseth. It is a brutal, unsustainable, and incredibly dangerous stalemate. Britain has deployed its ultimate weapon, its navy, but it is not working. The Icelanders, protected by their reinforced hulls and an iron will, are refusing to break. The violence is escalating with every passing day, pushing everyone involved towards one final, catastrophic confrontation that will have to settle the matter once and for all. The relentless violence of the Third Cod War, with its daily spectacle of grinding steel and high-speed chases, can seem abstract from a distance. It is easy to talk about frigates and patrol boats as if they are just pieces on a chessboard. But to understand the raw human core of this conflict, you have to zoom in. You have to step out of the historian's grand narrative and onto the freezing, spray-slicked bridge of a single ship. First one, then the other. You have to become the 2 captains at the heart of this storm. First, you are the captain of the Icelandic patrol vessel Thor. It is 04 hour. You have been on the bridge for 5 straight hours, and you'll be here for at least 3 more. The only light comes from the hypnotic green sweep of the radar screen and the dim red glow of the instrument panels. Your world is a small, dark, vibrating box, filled with the smell of stale coffee and ozone from the electronics. Through the salt-crusted window, you see nothing but an unnerving, churning blackness. Your mission is clear, righteous, and simple. You are defending your home. The fish in this water are your country's lifeblood, the resource that will build its schools and hospitals, the inheritance of your children. Every British trawler on that radar screen is a thief in your backyard, and every Royal Navy frigate is the hired muscle protecting him. Your day is a cycle of intense, heart-pounding stress and long stretches of monotonous, exhausting vigilance. You plan your attack runs like a fighter pilot studying the formation of the British fleet, looking for a moment of weakness, a gap you can exploit. When the attack comes, you are pure focus, shouting orders to the helm, your body braced for the inevitable, sickening crunch of impact. But perhaps the most important moments happen between the battles. You step away from the bridge and go below to the small, cramped galley. The ship is pitching violently, but the ship's cook, a civilian magician named John, is somehow bracing himself against a countertop, calmly stirring a giant pot. The rich, warm smell of kjötsúpa, a thick, traditional Icelandic lamb soup, fills the air. This hot, life-affirming meal is your most important weapon system. It is the fuel that keeps your crew's morale from breaking, a taste of the home you are out here fighting to protect. Now, with a sudden lurch, you are someone else. You are the skipper of the British trawler Southella, out of Hull. It is also O4U. You are also on a small, dark, vibrating bridge, but the air here smells of diesel fumes, grease, and the faint, permanent stench of fish guts. You are drinking a mug of scalding hot tea that is sweet enough to make your teeth ache. Your mission is just as clear, but it has nothing to do with patriotism or national destiny. You are here to fill your hold with fish, so you can pay your mortgage and feed your family. This is not a cause, it is a job your father did and his father before him. These waters are your factory floor, and the Icelanders are trying to lock the gates on you. Your life is a routine of spectacular, bone-breaking hardship. You work an 18-hour shift, followed by 6 hours of what can barely be called sleep. Much of that shift is spent on the open deck in freezing gale force conditions, wrestling with heavy gear, and gutting thousands of fish until your hands are raw and numb. This is one of the most dangerous jobs on the planet, even without a war going on. Now, on top of the risk of being washed overboard or crushed by the gear, you have to deal with the constant threat of an Icelandic patrol boat appearing out of the gloom to cut your nets or ram a frigate next to you. The exhaustion is a physical presence, a weight on your shoulders that never leaves. Your fear is not of a glorious death in battle, but of the ruinous, soul-crushing cost of losing your trawl gear, a debt that could haunt you for years. Day after day, you see the same ships. You recognize the sharp, aggressive lines of the Thor. You know the voice of its captain crackling over the radio with insults and warnings. Sociologists and oral historians still debate the extent to which the enemy in these confrontations became personalized. Were your angry shouts over the VHF radio aimed at the Icelandic government, a faceless entity far away? Or did you develop a genuine personal hatred for the man on that specific patrol boat, the one who cost you a week's wages last month? And for you, the Icelandic captain, was the trawler just a symbol of British arrogance? Or did you see the face of its skipper through your binoculars and feel a flicker of something else? Not sympathy, but a recognition of a fellow seaman caught in the same storm as you? One is fighting for his nation's future. The other is fighting to preserve his industry's past. One is an agent of his state. The other is a working man caught in the gears of geopolitics. But at this dark, cold hour, they are united by the vast, indifferent sea and a shared, profound exhaustion. And both are wondering, as they stare into the blackness, what new violence the coming dawn will bring. The two captains, the Icelandic defender and the British worker, are the human symbols of a conflict that has spiraled into a brutal, grinding war of attrition at sea. But the ships, no matter how reinforced, are taking a terrible beating. The crews, no matter how resolute, are nearing their breaking point. The violence has reached a pitch where the next logical step is for someone to make a fatal mistake. The crisis cannot be solved on the water. The final decisive moves will be made in the quiet, tense rooms of government. The winter of 1975 bleeds into 1976, and it is the most violent period of the entire saga. The collisions are a near-daily occurrence. Your patrol boat, the Thor, is in another brutal encounter with the frigate HMS Andromeda. The Thor's hull is gashed open, and it's forced to limp back to port for emergency repairs. Days later, it is back at sea, its fresh welds barely cooled. The British, for their part, are becoming more and more aggressive in their ramming tactics, desperate to put your cutters out of action. The cycle of violence is escalating, and the diplomatic protests from Reykjavik to London are becoming more and more frantic. You are in a cabinet meeting in Reykjavik. The reports from the Coast Guard are laid out on the table. They make for grim reading. Your small fleet is being systematically battered by a force many times its size. You have appealed to the Secretary General of NATO, Joseph Luns, to intervene. You have protested at the United Nations, but the British refuse to withdraw their warships. From your perspective, you are a sovereign nation whose economic zone is under military occupation by a supposed ally. Your protests have been ignored. Your diplomatic overtures have been rebuffed. You are left with one final dramatic option, a tool of statecraft so extreme it is almost never used between friendly nations. You decide to deploy the diplomatic nuclear option. The decision is made. Iceland will formally sever all diplomatic relations with the United Kingdom. Let the weight of that sink in. This is not just recalling your ambassador for a stern talking to. This is the official, legal, and political act of disowning another country. It is a statement to the entire world that you no longer consider the United Kingdom to be a friendly state with which normal relations are possible. It is an act usually reserved for the prelude to war or a schism between mortal enemies. For it to happen between two founding members of the NATO alliance is not just unprecedented, it is unthinkable. It is a profound, deep crack in the very foundation of the Western alliance. The task of delivering this historic insult falls to one man. You are now Niels Sigurdsson, Iceland's ambassador to the Court of St. James's. On February 19, 1976, you are driven in your official car to the grand, imposing building of the British Foreign Office in London. You are carrying a formal diplomatic note. You can imagine the heavy, surreal atmosphere of that meeting. The polite, stiff upper lip exchange with a senior British official as you hand him the piece of paper that declares his nation and yours are, for all intents and purposes, no longer friends. With that simple act, your job is officially over. Your embassy is no longer an embassy. You must now return to your office and tell your staff to begin packing their bags. You have just become the final, severed link between two warring neighbors. The news lands like a bombshell in London. The British government is publicly and profoundly humiliated. The headlines around the world are devastating. You have been diplomatically excommunicated by one of your closest allies. It paints Britain as an intransigent colonial-era bully, unable to resolve a dispute with a tiny neighbor without resorting to force. The domestic pressure on Prime Minister Harold Wilson, already immense, becomes unbearable. At NATO headquarters in Brussels, the mood is one of sheer panic. The alliance is predicated on solidarity. Its entire purpose is to present a united front against the Soviet Union. Now, two of its members who share responsibility for guarding the most strategic waterway in the world have officially disowned one another. The situation is not just an embarrassment. It is a direct threat to the military credibility of the entire organization. Diplomatic historians still debate whether Iceland's decision to sever ties was a brilliantly calculated gambit to force NATO's hand or a genuine emotional expression of national outrage. Was it a cold, rational escalation, the political equivalent of the net cutter, designed with a specific outcome in mind? Or was the Icelandic government simply at the end of its rope, so genuinely incensed and insulted by the Royal Navy's actions that they lashed out with the most powerful non-violent weapon they possessed? Whatever the motive, the effect is undeniable. Britain is now completely isolated. The Americans are furious. Other European nations, many of whom are eyeing their own 200-mile zones, are looking on with a mixture of sympathy for Iceland and dismay at Britain's heavy-handedness. The image of the Icelandic flag being formally lowered from the embassy building in London is a powerful symbol. The war of grinding steel at sea has finally triggered a political implosion on land. Iceland has detonated its ultimate diplomatic weapon, and the fallout is about to force an end to the conflict. The Icelandic flag being lowered from the embassy in London is more than a symbolic gesture. It is a geopolitical tripwire. The severing of diplomatic ties between two NATO allies sends a shockwave that travels from London across the Atlantic and lands squarely on a desk in the Foggy Bottom neighborhood of Washington, D.C. The Cod War has just become America's problem. You are a high-level aide in the U.S. State Department. Your boss is the formidable, brilliant, and notoriously impatient Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger. Kissinger is a man who thinks in terms of continents and grand strategy. His entire world is a high-stakes chess game played with the Soviet Union and China. He is managing nuclear arms treaties, navigating the complexities of the Middle East, and orchestrating the delicate dance of détente. The absolute last thing he wants to deal with is a squabble between two allies over, of all things, fish. In private, you hear him express his profound annoyance. To him, this is an absurd and infuriating distraction, a parish pump dispute that is consuming time and energy that should be focused on preventing global annihilation. He sees two stubborn rocky islands in the North Atlantic behaving like children, and he has little patience for it. But while the State Department sees a nuisance, the building across the river, the Pentagon, sees a 5-alarm fire. You are now a general at the Pentagon, and your job is to plan for a potential war with the Soviet Union. For you, the Icelandic threat to leave NATO and close the Keflavik base is not a diplomatic bluff. It is an existential nightmare. You unroll the strategic maps. You point to the Guk Gap. You explain to the men in suits that the entire U.S. submarine detection network, the early warning systems, the staging point for the aircraft that hunt Soviet boomers, it all hinges on that one single base. To lose it would be the single greatest strategic blow to the alliance since its founding. You and your fellow military chiefs march over to the State Department and make it clear to Kissinger. This ridiculous fishfight is now a primary threat to the national security of the United States. It must be solved. Immediately. Reluctantly, Kissinger is forced to turn his attention from the global chess game to this messy regional brawl. The full, overwhelming diplomatic weight of the United States is now brought to bear. But the target of this pressure is not Iceland. You, America, see Iceland as the aggrieved party, the one acting out of a desperate, if disruptive, sense of self-preservation. More importantly, Iceland holds the trump card, the base. The pressure is therefore aimed squarely and ruthlessly at London. Historians still debate the precise nature of the American ultimatum to Britain. Was it a formal written threat, a diplomatic cable outlining specific consequences if Britain failed to back down? Or was it a more subtle but equally chilling series of high-level conversations? You are the British Foreign Secretary James Callaghan on a secure phone line to Kissinger. The message, however it is phrased, is unambiguous. Britain is risking its special relationship with America. It is behaving in a way that is endangering the entire Western alliance. And if it continues, it will find itself very, very isolated. The unspoken subtext is clear. End this, or we will make you end this. Britain, humiliated and now cornered by its most powerful ally, needs a way to surrender without looking like it is surrendering. A face-saving exit ramp must be constructed. Kissinger provides it. The solution will not be a bilateral agreement between London and Reykjavik. The solution will come from NATO. The powerful and respected Secretary General of NATO, Joseph Luns, is officially appointed as a mediator. This is a stroke of diplomatic genius. It allows the British government to publicly claim that they are making concessions not because they have lost to Iceland or been bullied by America, but for the greater good of NATO solidarity. The negotiations that follow, under Luns's mediation at NATO headquarters, are short and brutal. You are the chief British negotiator, and you realize within minutes that you have walked into a trap. The discussion is no longer about historic fishing rights or international law. The agenda is set by the Americans and the NATO leadership. The only topic on the table is the strategic necessity of securing the Keflavik base. Your arguments about the livelihoods of your fishermen in Grimsby are listened to with polite impatience and then completely ignored. In a room where the primary concern is the threat of Soviet nuclear submarines, the fate of a few hundred fishing boats does not even register. You are no longer in a negotiation. You are there to receive the terms of your surrender. Henry Kissinger, the man who couldn't have cared less about Cod, has been forced to become the conflict's reluctant and decisive peacemaker. His intervention, driven by the cold, hard logic of the Cold War, has sealed your fate. The fight on the sea was a stalemate, but the fight in the corridors of power is a rout. The negotiations at NATO headquarters are a political endgame, a slow, grinding surrender conducted in hushed tones and formal language. But back on the violent, chaotic stage of the North Atlantic, the war is still raging. The captains and crews of the ships know nothing of the secret talks and American ultimatums. For them, the reality is the daily, brutal fight for position. The conflict is a powder keg of exhaustion and aggression, and it is about to be ignited by one final, spectacular collision, an event so violent it will serve as the physical climax to the entire saga. You are on the bridge of the Icelandic patrol boat Thor, the purpose-built ramming vessel. It is a day of rough seas and high tension. You are once again attempting a cutting run on a British trawler. On an intercept course is the Royal Navy frigate HMS Andromeda, a powerful Leander-class warship. You have been playing a dangerous game of chicken with this particular frigate all morning. The British captain is skilled and aggressive. You are equally so. It is a duel between two masters of this strange, violent art form. This time the maneuvering is faster, the angles are tighter, and the judgment of one of the captains is off by a fatal few feet. Instead of a glancing blow or a controlled pass-through, the two ships are on a direct collision course. You are on the bridge of the Thor. You see the towering, flared bow of the Andromeda looming over you. It seems to blot out the sky. There is no time to turn, no time to react, only a split second to brace for an impact you know is going to be catastrophic. The Andromeda strikes the Thor at an oblique angle, but with immense force. The sound is not a crunch or a grind. It is a deep, resonant boom, like a giant bell being struck, a sound that echoes for miles across the empty sea. The reinforced bow of the frigate acts like a can opener, tearing a huge 20-foot gash in the Thor's hull, ripping through steel plate and structural supports. The much smaller Icelandic vessel is violently thrown sideways, rolling so far over that its mast almost touches the water. Men are thrown across the bridge, equipment is torn from its mountings, and the terrifying shriek of twisting metal is followed by the roar of incoming seawater as a major compartment begins to flood. On the bridge of HMS Andromeda, the shock is just as profound. Your warship, which you thought was invincible compared to these small patrol boats, shudders violently. The collision has buckled your own bow plates and, more critically, has damaged a forward missile magazine. For a few terrifying moments, both captains are confronted with the reality that they have almost sunk each other. The Thor is grievously wounded, listing heavily, its crew scrambling to control the flooding. The Andromeda, while in better shape, has sustained serious damage that will require a long and expensive trip to a naval dockyard. This single violent encounter is the point of no return. Naval historians have exhaustively analyzed the logs and position reports of this incident. Some argue that it was the inevitable result of months of escalating aggression, a tragic but ultimately accidental outcome of a deadly game. Others suggest a more deliberate motive, that one side or the other made a conscious decision to inflict disabling damage, to finally cross the line from harassment to outright combat. Whatever the truth, the effect is the same. The footage of the crippled Thor limping back to port, its side torn open, becomes a powerful symbol in Iceland of British aggression. For the British Admiralty, the incident is a horrifying wake-up call. They have come within a whisker of sinking the flagship of a friendly nation's coast guard, an act that would have had unthinkable political consequences. The news of the collision reaches the negotiators in Brussels. It is no longer a theoretical discussion. The war at sea has just produced a near-fatal incident. It underscores the urgency of the American demands and strips Britain of its last remaining arguments. You cannot claim to be conducting a restrained police action when your most advanced warships are tearing holes in other ships. You are the British Prime Minister, and the report is on your desk. The political cost of the diplomatic break, the financial cost of the naval deployment, and now the stark, physical evidence that your ships are out of control. The weight is too much to bear. The will of the British government is finally, irrevocably broken. The order is drafted, the signal is sent. The Royal Navy is to stand down. On the bridge of your trawler, you receive the message from the fleet commander. All protective services are being withdrawn. You are to haul your gear and immediately depart the 200-mile zone. It is over. You stare out at the gray, empty water, the space where a Royal Navy frigate had been patrolling just an hour before. A feeling of profound, bitter abandonment settles over you. After months of fighting, after all the risks and all the hardship, you have been ordered to retreat. The final crushing collision between the Thor and the Andromeda was the last violent spasm of the conflict. The war did not end with a peace treaty, but with a sudden, exhausted admission of defeat. The guns have fallen silent, not because of a truce, but because one side has finally been forced to lay them down. The final violent collision between the Thor and the Andromeda is the war's bloody full stop. The fighting at sea sputters to a halt, replaced by the grim finality of the British withdrawal. The War of Steel has been won by Iceland. Now, the surrender on paper must be signed. You are in a sterile conference room in Oslo, Norway in late May 1976. The air is thick with resentment and exhaustion. On one side of the table sits the British delegation, their faces grim. On the other side, you, the Icelandic foreign minister, are calm, your expression unreadable. The NATO mediator, Joseph Lunds, presides, his only goal being to get a signature and end this embarrassing chapter in the alliance's history. The resulting agreement, signed on the 1st of June, is not a compromise. It is the formal ratification of a total Icelandic victory. The United Kingdom officially, and this time permanently, agrees to recognize Iceland's 200 nautical mile exclusive fisheries zone. The war is over. Iceland has won everything it fought for. As a final, almost pathetic face-saving gesture for the once mighty British fishing industry, a tiny clause is inserted. A maximum of just 24 British trawlers will be permitted to fish inside the zone for a final 6-month grace period. After that, the door would be closed and locked forever. You can imagine the atmosphere on that last day, in late November 1976. You are the skipper of the Ranger, one of the last British trawlers granted a temporary license. The weather is grim, a fitting backdrop for the occasion. You give the order to haul your gear for the very last time. As the net comes up, dripping with the cold Atlantic, you know you are witnessing the end of a tradition that has sustained your family and your town for centuries. You make the final entry in your logbook, turn your ship's bow east, towards home, knowing you will never return. This quiet, somber moment in the North Atlantic sends a tsunami-like ripple across the globe. Iceland's victory was the test case the world had been watching. Back at the UN Conference on the Law of the Sea, your David and Goliath victory, where you successfully established and defended a 200-mile limit against a major naval power, shatters the last vestiges of resistance from the old maritime empires. If Britain couldn't stop Iceland, how could any other nation hope to prevent the tide from turning? The 200-mile exclusive economic zone is swiftly adopted as the new global standard. Suddenly, the map of the world is fundamentally redrawn. It is the single largest peaceful transfer of resources from the global commons to national control in human history. You are a cartographer, and your job has just become incredibly interesting. You are drawing new lines on the ocean, enclosing vast new territories for coastal states from Peru to the Philippines, and you discover the bizarre, unintended consequences of this new law. You find a tiny, uninhabited, guano-covered rock in the middle of the Pacific, like France's Clipperton Atoll. Previously worthless, this speck of land now generates an EEZ larger than mainland France itself. A huge circle of ocean suddenly under French control. The great 19th century land grab has been replaced by the late 20th century sea grab. For you in Iceland, it is a moment of supreme national vindication. You are no longer the lawbreaker. You are the prophet. You are the pioneer who saw the future of ocean governance and fought 3 wars to make it a reality. The principle you bled for has been adopted by the entire world. It is a victory that cements your national identity as a small nation that can, through sheer force of will, bend the world to its logic. But as the years pass, a complicated and troubling question begins to emerge from the legacy of your victory. International relations experts still debate whether the global adoption of the 200-mile EEZ has been a net positive for ocean conservation. Did fencing off the oceans actually save the fish? Or has it simply privatized the problem of overfishing, shifting the responsibility from a poorly managed international commons to individual nations, many of whom proved to be even worse stewards of their own resources? In theory, the EEZ should have worked. A nation with sole ownership of a resource has a vested interest in managing it sustainably for the long term. But in practice, the story is much darker. Many governments, faced with powerful domestic fishing lobbies or the lure of short-term cash, simply mismanaged their newfound territories. They subsidized their own oversized fleets, ignored scientific advice, and fished their own stocks to the point of collapse. The global problem of overfishing didn't vanish. It was merely subdivided. The tragedy of the commons was replaced by 1,000 individual national tragedies. Your victory in the Cod Wars was a masterpiece of law, diplomacy, and brute force. You won for Iceland the right to be the sole master of its own aquatic destiny. But that victory also bequeathed the same right to every other coastal nation on Earth. And the great unanswered question that echoes from the empty decks of the last British trawler is whether humanity, having finally drawn fences around its ocean pastures, would have the wisdom to manage what was inside them. The new law of the sea settles upon the world's oceans, a great and celebrated reordering of the planet. For every nation that gained a vast new economic zone, there was a nation that lost its traditional fishing grounds. For every winner, there was a loser. And nowhere was the price of this new world order felt more keenly, more bitterly, than in the English port towns that had once fueled an empire with fish. Iceland's victory had secured its future. Now you will witness what it cost to build it. You are the skipper of the trawler Arctic Corsair, and you are steaming up the Humber estuary, back towards your home port of Hull. It is the final return. The 6-month grace period is over. As you navigate the familiar channel, you know this is not a homecoming. It is a funeral procession. The mood on your ship is not one of anger, but of a deep, hollowed-out exhaustion. Your job, your trade, the only life you and your crew have ever known, has been rendered obsolete by a signature on a piece of paper in a conference room hundreds of miles away. The impact on the port towns of Hull, Grimsby, and Fleetwood is not a slow decline. It is a sudden, catastrophic collapse. One day, you are a deep-sea fisherman, a member of a proud and insular tribe, earning good money in one of the world's most dangerous professions. The next, you are on the dole, standing in line with thousands of your former crewmates. The fishing industry was not just a part of the local economy, it was the local economy. The ripple effect is devastating. The men who made the nets, the women who processed the fish, the engineers who repaired the engines, the factories that made the ice, the chandlers who supplied the ships, an entire ecosystem of jobs built up over generations withers and dies almost overnight. These are communities built on a shared identity of hard work, risk, and a profound connection to the sea. Now that identity is stripped away. You walk through the streets of Grimsby, once the largest and busiest fishing port on Earth, and you feel the heart has been torn out of it. The pubs are full of unemployed men in the middle of the day, their skills suddenly worthless. A sense of purposelessness, of a proud culture being consigned to the history books, settles over the town like a permanent damp fog. The physical evidence of the collapse is everywhere. The once crowded docks fall silent, save for the mournful cry of the gulls. The government, faced with a vast, now useless fleet of highly specialized vessels, comes up with a solution that is both pragmatic and heartbreaking. They offer a scrapping scheme. You are the owner of a trawler, a vessel that has been your family's life work, a ship that has safely carried its crew through Arctic hurricanes. The government now offers you a lump sum of cash to sail it on one final voyage, to the scrapyard. You stand on the shore at Blyth or Inverkeithing and watch as acetylene torches bite into the proud steel hull of your ship, dismembering it for scrap metal. It is the ultimate indignity, a tangible, fiery symbol of your industry's death. Economic historians still debate whether the collapse of the British distant water fishing industry was solely a consequence of the Cod Wars. Were the Icelanders truly the sole architects of this destruction? Or were the wars simply the final brutal blow to an industry already weakened by other forces? The massive spike in fuel prices after the 1973 oil crisis had already made the long voyages north incredibly expensive. The British fleet was aging, and the cost of building new, modern trawlers was prohibitive, and competition from other fishing nations was fiercer than ever. The industry was already on shaky ground. The Cod Wars were not just a shove, they were a push off a cliff. But for you, the unemployed trawler man, these academic distinctions mean nothing. You know who you blame. You blame the Icelanders for their intransigence, and you blame, with an even deeper and more lasting bitterness, your own government. You feel you were used as pawns in a geopolitical game. You were encouraged to fight, protected by the Royal Navy, and hailed as defenders of British interests. And then, when it became politically inconvenient, you were abandoned. This profound sense of betrayal would poison the politics of these towns for a generation, a deep well of resentment against a distant, uncaring London establishment. You are an old man now, walking along the redeveloped waterfront in Hull. The old fish docks are gone, replaced by a shopping center, a museum, and an aquarium. The air no longer smells of diesel and fish meal. The roar of the winches and the shouts of the auctioneers have been replaced by the quiet chatter of tourists. The ghost fleets of Grimsby and Hull are truly ghosts now, their memory preserved behind glass. Iceland's victory created a modern, prosperous nation, but every victory has its price. And that price is written in the silence of these once great ports, a testament to a world and a way of life that the new law of the sea had erased forever. Let us leave the quiet, rust-streaked quaysides of Hull and Grimsby with their ghosts of a lost industry. Let us cross the cold sea one last time and return to the land of the victor. Here, in Iceland, the legacy of the Cod Wars is not one of silence and decay, but of noise, growth, and a profound, unshakable sense of national self-worth. You are standing in the center of modern Reykjavik. The city is a marvel of Nordic design, a vibrant, prosperous hub of culture and technology. Sleek buildings of glass and steel stand alongside the colorful, historic wooden houses. The air is clean, the water in the harbor is clear, and the whole city is warmed by the clean geothermal energy bubbling up from the volcanic earth beneath your feet. This confident modern nation, a consistent feature on lists of the world's best places to live, is the house that Cod built. And the Cod Wars were the brutal, protracted foundation laying. Victory, however, brought with it a heavy burden. For decades, you could point to the foreign fleets as the source of your problems, the villains responsible for the declining fish stocks. Now they are gone. You stand in a 200-mile zone that is exclusively yours. The fish are now your sole responsibility. If the stocks collapse, you have no one to blame but yourselves. Winning the war was the easy part. Now you had to win the peace, and that meant figuring out how to manage your prize without destroying it. What you did next became a new kind of battlefield, this time against your own worst instincts. Your government empowered your Marine Research Institute, making the advice of scientists, not the desires of fishermen, the basis for policy. This led to the creation of one of the world's most sophisticated and controversial fisheries management systems. You established a total allowable catch TAC for cod and other species each year, based on the best available science. This TAC was then divided up into individual transferable quotas, or ITQs. Essentially, every fishing vessel was granted a specific share of the total catch, a right that could be bought, sold, or leased like any other form of private property. The Cod Wars themselves, meanwhile, have seeped from the history books into the very bedrock of your cultural identity. You are in a Reykjavik record store, and you can find folk songs and rock anthems lionizing the heroic crews of the patrol boats. You are in a bookshop, and you find memoirs, histories, and even board games where players refight the famous confrontations. The conflict has become your modern saga, a David and Goliath story that perfectly encapsulates the national character, a deep stubbornness, a suspicion of larger powers, and an unbreakable belief in your own self-reliance. To suggest to an Icelander that the British might have had a point is to invite a long, detailed, and very passionate lecture on the finer points of international maritime law. But the solution you devised to manage your victory, the ITQ system, created its own complex and painful legacy. Economists and social critics in Iceland still debate whether the quota system, in saving the fish, inadvertently sold the soul of the fishing industry. On paper, it was an elegant, market-based solution to the tragedy of the commons. In practice, it led to a massive consolidation of wealth and power. The quotas, now a valuable commodity, began to flow from the small, independent owner-operators to large, heavily capitalized corporations. You are a young man in a small fishing village in the Westfjords. Your grandfather built his own boat, your father fished his whole life. But a few bad seasons, a broken engine, and your father was forced to sell his quota to a large company based in Reykjavik. Now the fishing rights for the waters your family has worked for a century are owned by a boardroom you'll never see. The local boats are tied up at the dock, rotting, while giant factory trawlers from the capital come and harvest the fish that were once the lifeblood of your community. The system created a new class of fabulously wealthy owners, the sea barons or quota kings, while dispossessing the very fishermen who had been the backbone of the industry. Still, there is no denying the bigger picture. The stability and immense wealth generated by the well-managed and profitable fishing industry became the engine for Iceland's economic diversification. The money from cod was the seed capital that allowed you to build a world-class tourism industry, to develop a thriving software and biotech sector, and to finance a banking system that would have its own spectacular and very Icelandic boom and bust. Ultimately, winning the Cod Wars forged the modern Icelandic psyche. It was the final, violent, and triumphant chapter in your long saga of independence. It was the moment you proved to the world, and more importantly to yourselves, that you were the undisputed masters of your own destiny. You look at the confident, prosperous nation around you, and you know it was born in those cold gray waters in the defiant stand against a fading empire, and in the difficult, often painful choices you had to make to manage the victory you so brutally won. You won. You became the master of your own house, and in doing so you showed every other coastal nation how to do the same. The final formal chapter of this long legal war was written not on the high seas, but in a conference hall in Montego Bay, Jamaica, in 1982. It was here that the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea was finally adopted. Enshrined in its text as Article 57 was the principle of the 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone. The radical, defiant, war-provoking idea that you had pioneered was now the law of the world. In a final, fitting irony, the United Kingdom, the nation that had defended the old ways with the full might of its navy, would not get around to formally ratifying this new constitution for the oceans until 1997, long after the ghost fleets had settled into the silt of their harbors. So, the ultimate question remains. After all the conflict, after all the ramming and the ripped nets, after redrawing the map of the world, did you actually save the cod? For Iceland, the answer is a qualified, complicated, but ultimately hopeful yes. After a few painful decades of learning, of boom and bust cycles even under your own management, the strict, science-based quota system did begin to work. The cod stocks in your waters, while a shadow of their historic abundance, have stabilized and are now considered among the best managed in the world. But your victory was not a silver bullet for the oceans. Just look across the Atlantic to the Grand Banks of Canada. They too had their 200-mile zone, but a toxic mix of political cowardice and industry pressure led them to ignore their own scientists. And in 1992, their once legendary cod fishery collapsed so completely that it has never recovered. You won the right to be a responsible steward, but the 200-mile line was no guarantee of wisdom. The Cod Wars never really ended, you know. Their echoes are still all around us. You are on a French fishing boat in the English Channel in the wake of Brexit. A new maritime border has been drawn, and you are now excluded from waters your family has fished for generations. You join a flotilla to blockade the port of Jersey, your anger and frustration a direct mirror of what the British trawlermen felt 50 years earlier. The language is the same: historic rights, national sovereignty, a betrayal by politicians. The Cod Wars provided the modern playbook for resource nationalism at sea, a playbook that is being dusted off and reused right now. And this is perhaps the most chilling legacy of your strange cold conflict. Futurists and environmental scientists still debate whether the Cod War model, a determined, unilateral, and aggressive defense of a vital national resource, will become the dominant pattern of 21st century geopolitics. As the climate changes, as fresh water becomes scarcer, as the global demand for rare minerals and clean energy grows, will we see this pattern repeat on a larger, more dangerous scale? Will there be water wars fought over rivers dammed upstream? Will there be conflicts on the deep seabed over access to polymetallic nodules? Will the newly ice-free shipping lanes of the Arctic become the next great stage for confrontation? From the vantage point of today, your fight over a humble whitefish looks less like a quirky historical anomaly and more like a terrifying dress rehearsal for the resource conflicts to come. You stand today on a clifftop in the West Fjords of Iceland, looking out over the water. The sea is calm now. The only boats on the horizon are your own. You won. You secured your nation. You changed the world. And you even, for the most part, saved the fish in your own backyard. It was a victory born of stubbornness, ingenuity, and a refusal to be told that your survival was less important than another nation's traditions. It is a messy, complicated, and uniquely human story. A story that reminds us that the great currents of history are often turned not by the grand clash of ideologies, but by the simple, powerful, and unyielding desire of a people to protect their home, even if that home is nothing more than the cold, dark, and increasingly empty ocean. And so, the echoes of the churning engines and the shriek of tearing steel finally fade away, leaving behind only the steady, rhythmic whisper of the waves against a distant shore. The great conflicts of history can feel so vast, so all-consuming, but in the end they too are quieted by time, their sharp edges worn smooth by the relentless tide of years. The struggles of those captains and their crews, which felt so monumental, so life-defining in the moment, have now dissolved back into the immense gray stillness of the North Atlantic. The ocean, which was the stage for all this human drama, has reclaimed its silence, its cold, deep, and abiding peace. And you can let the story drift away now, letting the images of the ships and the sea soften and blur at the edges, fading gently into the background. Your own journey for tonight is over. You are safe, you are comfortable, and the only waves are the gentle ones of approaching sleep.